Sound is.
At 3 a.m. on the 28th of October 1940, Italian ambassador to Greece, Emanuele Grazzi, delivers an ultimatum from Benito Mussolini to Greek Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas. Mussolini demands that the Italian army gain free passage through Greece to occupy strategic locations as part of their war effort. Metaxas is now faced with two choices, both of which will result in the deaths of many of his own people. Surrender or war? In the same laconic tradition as the Spartans before him, Metaxas's answer, given in the diplomatic language of the day, French, was simple. Then it is war, which was then translated to a simple "ohi," no. Within hours, Italian troops would pour over the border, but so too did Greeks pour into the streets, shouting "ohi" in defiance. Thus, Ohi Day was born. The Italians would meet unexpectedly strong resistance, which would last for some 6 months. Greece delaying the Italian advance so much that it drew the attention of Hitler. Enraged by Italy's lack of progress, Hitler would ultimately mobilize his forces to take Greece. But the Greek resistance, hopelessly outnumbered, courageously continued. The Germans would commit brutal atrocities, including the murder of entire villages, the torturing and starving of those left alive in their pursuit of information, and other unspeakable acts. The result, though, far from breaking the Greek spirit, was further defiance. When the Nazis finally climbed the Acropolis and ordered that the Greek flag be taken down to be replaced with the Nazi swastika, the Evzon on duty, Konstantinos Koukidis, defiantly wrapped himself in the Greek flag and jumped off the rock to his death. A month later, Manolis Glezos, a future Greek politician, and his friend Apostolos Santas would climb the Acropolis and steal the Nazi flag, inspiring the nation to continue its defiance against the brutal occupiers. Across the nation, Greeks would fight with incredible courage, but also with incredible cheek. As Germans took as dive-bombed Greek targets, Greeks stubbornly stood their ground, shooting back at aircraft with whatever meager firearms they had available. They would ambush paratroopers even before their feet hit Greek soil, while the Cretans would get away with kidnapping a German general. This defiance and patriotism inspired the praise of world leaders. Adolf Hitler said, "For the sake of historical truth, I must verify that only the Greeks, of all the adversaries who confronted us, fought with bold courage and highest disregard of death." Winston Churchill: "The word heroism, I am afraid, does not render the least of those acts of self-sacrifice of the Greeks, which were the defining factor in the victorious outcome of the common struggle of the nations during World War II, for the human freedom and dignity. If it were not for the bravery of the Greeks and their courage, the outcome of World War II would be undetermined. Until now, we used to say that the Greeks fight like heroes. Now we shall say the heroes fight like Greeks." Joseph Stalin: "I am sorry because I'm getting old, and I shall not live to thank the Greek people, whose resistance decided World War II." Charles de Gaulle: "I am unable to give the proper breadth of gratitude I feel for the heroic resistance of the people and the leaders of Greece." Georgy Konstantinovich Zhurov, Marshal of the Soviet Army: "If the Russian people managed to raise resistance at the doors of Moscow, to halt and reverse the German torrent, they owe it to the Greek people, who delayed the German divisions during the time they could bring us to our knees." The troops of Australia and New Zealand, the ANZACs, would be on hand to assist the Greeks. What you're about to hear are some of the lesser-known stories of those ANZACs. Their connection to Greece, and their connection to the people who in many cases helped save them. So while the world knows well the stories of Pearl Harbor, D-Day, Iwo Jima, the Battle of Britain and Midway, let's not forget the crucial contribution of Greece in helping to decide the greatest military conflict the world has seen, all embodied in a simple, defiant word: Ohi. This episode of Ouzo Talk is brought to you by Lateral, contemporary apartments for lease designed with your lifestyle and comfort in mind. With apartments located close to public transport, restaurants and shops, Lateral gives you access to the perfect work-life balance. From sunny rooftop pools to modern underground gyms and work-from-home hubs, Lateral's residents are provided with modern amenities to maximize well-being and enhance community living. Visit lateralres.com.au to find out more. Lateral. It's renting reimagined. Nick, welcome to a very special episode of Ouzo Talk. How are you, my friend?
I'm excellent, Tom. Can't wait for this episode to kick off. It's very emotional and passionate for us.
Absolutely. I've always loved history, and I know you do too, in particular World War II. So we both seem to love the books, the documentaries, the movies, but in all of that, there's not too much in the way of Greek history of World War II in popular culture, is there? Which is bizarre when you think about that intro that we just heard, isn't it?
It is. It's very bizarre, Tom. There's so many amazing stories to be told, and yeah, it should be recorded, and we're not sure why.
I feel as though it's really important for us to be telling these stories. The Americans, obviously, through Hollywood, do a great job of telling their stories. Other cultures do a great job of telling their stories as well through other mediums. You know, maybe this is another way that we can sort of get the word out via podcast. Look, it's also important to mention that World War II is actually the reason why many of our families ended up in Australia or in the US, in Canada, in the UK. Certainly for mine, I suspect may be similar for your family too, Nick.
Yeah, the main reason was we came out here because there was nothing left in Greece. There was no work. But a lot of my ancestors did fight in World War II. So that's why it's going to be a really interesting discussion we're going to have.
Very close to your heart.
It is, definitely. So I had my dad's older first cousin, Costa Thanassiou, was involved in World War II. My dad's sister's husband, Fotis Papafotis, was involved as well. They were resistance fighters. My grandmother actually got caught by the Germans as well. She was a prisoner for several weeks. Yeah. So a lot of my ancestors were involved, but I should do a bit of digging around because I'm sure there's a lot more stories in my own family that I don't know about that would be worth sharing.
There's countless stories. I mean, even in my family, there are stories of my great-grandmother being beaten by the Italians for stealing pasta off them. You know, my wife's family, two of her great-grandfathers passed away in Albania.
Yeah, wow.
It's obviously something that digs close to the bone for most of our families. But look, it's such an important topic. We need some experts to do justice to this conversation. So with us here in the distillery, we have archaeologist, historical research consultant, and author of the book, The Forgotten Flotilla, Dr. Michael Bendon. Welcome to Ouzo Talk, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. Nick, we also have our first returning guest as well, in the form of proud Cretan and font of knowledge, Nick Andriotakis, who has a very close connection to the commemoration of the Battle of Crete. Nick, welcome back, mate.
Good to be here again, Tom.
The legend, living legend, back in the house.
Absolutely. You're almost a producer of this show.
No.
Dear.
It's great you guys have the energy and the vision to put it together.
Thank you very much. As ever, you've come bearing gifts though as well. What have you brought for us to drink this evening?
So our story today will cover the Australian story in Greece, World War II. And as we move through the stories and as we move through the legacy, we also move through the landscape. And through that landscape come out these magnificent boutique spirits peculiar to the vineyards and the terroir of these places. Mm-hmm. Whilst we don't have any documentary evidence, I'm sure the ANZACs would have had some of these drinks and some of these spirits.
Wow.
To lift their spirits.
I can see that just having a smell of the one that we've just poured here, you can just see a bunch of diggers sitting around trying to drink this up.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And there wouldn't have been enough rum to go around in Greece for all the Aussies, so they would have tucked into some of that Tsipro for sure.
Partaken of the local fare, as they say.
The first one is a barrelized Tsipro from northern Greece, a classic Tsipro that's been stored in barrels, and it's called the Dark Cave. And this is an aromatic Tsipro. It's got this beautiful honeydew colour. It's taken the tannins and it's taken the essences out of the barrels, and that's what we are sampling for the first one.
And it's important to mention that Tsipro and Raki in general usually is clear. It's just,
and they really are the same drinks, but I suppose in mainland Greece they call it Tsipro. In Crete they call it Tsikoudia,
yes,
or Raki. And the difference is basically the grape varieties and the terroir.
Yeah.
That's it. The landscape, the climate, the water, all those nuances and differences, and the soil profile, and all these things give these unique characteristics.
I can't think of a better way to start off this episode with the people in this room than with a nice drink that you've provided, Nick. So thank you for being here again. Thanks, gentlemen, Stiniyamas, thank you for being part of this.
Cheers, boys.
Cheers.
Cheers, long distance.
There you go.
It smells great.
And you can taste the barrel in it.
You can taste the barrel.
Yeah.
The oak, it's beautiful.
The oak.
Nick, you mentioned there was no documentary evidence about the ANZACs sampling all of this.
Now you know why.
No, not at all. I think if you look at a lot of the personal diaries that some of the men kept, the alcohol of Greece features quite strongly.
Does it really?
They mention quite a lot about sampling. They were very impressed that it was cheap.
Really?
And well, on the Greek beer, even they said this is the beer that's closest to what we have at home.
Wow!
And often they mention getting invited into the locals' houses and homes and sampling the local tipple.
So they were impressed by what
very much so. I think that young men. They were very alcohol orientated, I think, working very hard.
Knowing Australians, anything alcoholic tasted well.
Very much so, I think. So there is documentary evidence in some of the diaries about them getting out there and trying it out.
So there you go. So we're drinking what the ANZACs drank, Tom.
As always, we're drinking history on this show.
Yeah,
as always.
Liquid history.
That's liquid history. Here we go again.
Oh dear, fantastic. Well, I think you've brought some other things as well, Nick, but we'll probably get into those.
We'll get into those as we go through the journey.
There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bottles on the table, of which I think we'll probably try most of before the night's out.
We should be trying them all.
I think we might have to, Tom. They're all nicely shaped, different bottles, so there's different forms of liquid in there. We'll have to try it all.
Outstanding. Fantastic, gents. Well, look, Michael, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about what you do and what's your connection to Greece, because you made a very important World War II discovery not too long ago in Crete, which resulted in your book, didn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm an archaeologist, as you said. I worked for a great number of years in Israel and then went up to Germany, and I really wanted to get back to the Mediterranean, so I wrote a quick email off to a very well-known diver, an archaeologist in Crete, Elpida Hadjidaki, and she invited me to come down and work with her. So I went down and I was working on the ancient site of Thalassaena in western Crete.
Right.
And I don't know if you've ever done any archaeological work, but in the middle of summer in Crete it's pretty hot. And when the wind comes up you get pretty dusty and dirty. So we'd always go for a swim. We were very lucky, it's a maritime site, we're right on the coast. So I went for a swim, and Elpida said to me, she said, "There's a wreck over there." And I said, "Oh, what is it?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know, it's World War II." And I said, "Well, can I have a look at it?" She said, "Go over and have a look." So I swam over to it. When I came back, I asked her some more questions about it, and she said, "I don't know much about it at all, but some of the locals might." So she took me around to meet some of the locals and speak about it. But I did ask her, I said, "Well, I'd really like to do the research on this wreck if I could." And she said, "It's yours. Go, do the work." So from that point, I think it must have been 2009 perhaps,
right.
I started work on it. And I found some of the most incredible stories connected to this. As an archaeologist, I've always worked on ancient sites, but suddenly here I was getting into World War II, and it became almost all-consuming in a way. The idea of being able to find in the documents, in the archives, to find references to people, to places, to the events, and then I could trace those when I was in Crete. I could move around and I knew the places. On that point, there was a name that just kept coming up associated with this vessel type that I'd found, and it was a British fellow, a John Digby Sutton. I'd been researching for almost 2 years. I'd identified the vessel type, I knew what was going on with it, I'd been to the archives and I'd picked a few things out, and I wanted to find out more about the vessel type, so I went to an internet forum and I put this on. A question, I said, I'd like to find out more about a vessel type, a landing craft tank. I would say within 2 hours I got a reply, and it said, well, I live next door to somebody who knows somebody who lives next door to a landing craft skipper from World War II.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, well, that's good. Can I get his number? Can I get his number? And they said, yeah, well, we'll ask him. And so the next day I've got his number, and I've called him up, and a very proper British gentleman answered the phone. Oh, hello. And I said, I hear you're a landing craft skipper in World War II. And he said, yes, I was. And I said, what type of landing craft? And he said, oh, it was a landing craft tank Mark 1, landing craft tank Mark 1. And I thought, oh, that's what I've got. And I said, what happened to it? And he said, those damn Jerrys bombed me and sank it. And I thought, well, that's what happened to the vessel I've got. And I said, where? He said, Western Crete.
Oh, you're kidding.
Wow. I said, John, I've found your vessel.
Wow.
I found the actual skipper for the vessel.
Wow.
And I went over and spent a lot of time with him before he passed away. I met him when he was 93, I think.
Wow.
He passed away at 98.
Was it?
Pardon?
2009.
I think I went over in 2012.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Because we organised it, and fortunately I was able to organise HD video with interviews and that.
Great.
But we used to just go up the pub, and he'd drink a half and I'd drink a pint, and off we'd go. And I'd record all these conversations, and he just told me some of the most incredible stories. Well, one of the things he used to say to me, he said, those bloody Aussies, irrepressible those Aussies. Glad they were on our side. You know, he used to tell stories. He'd drop them off back in Crete, and they'd be getting off saying, thanks, skipper, we owe you a drink.
Yeah.
See you in town. So the irrepressible Aussies, he just enjoyed spending a lot of time with the Aussies there. So. But he passed away at 98, and I went over to give the eulogy at his funeral. His family said you'd made such a difference to him. It brought it all back. He'd never spoken about Greece or Crete or what had happened to him. And suddenly he started to tell all the stories about the evacuation of Greece and the ANZACs and what he did in Crete, taking the tanks round to Retimo or to Heraklion, and talking about the bombing and the Greek people and the Cretan people. You know, I asked him, I said, well, John, what's it like to be bombed by a Stuka? I said, is it scary? He said, no, it's not scary, it's a job. It's a job. And I guess the man...
Very
at
stiff
that
upper
stage,
lip.
yeah, well, 21 years old. I mean,
fearless.
You're indestructible at 21, and I think that's the way John was. He just looked at it as an adventure.
I can't help but think, for someone like yourself as an archaeologist, who would deal with stuff that's generally much older than what you encountered in that bay, how was it being able to speak to someone connected to what you were looking at?
My greatest ever discovery.
Really?
My greatest ever discovery. And I never had a plan to write a book about the wreck or what was going on in Greece and Crete at that time. But having met John, I felt that I wanted to do something for him before he passed away. So I wrote the book. And that's when I started doing all the research. I did mention to you earlier when I came in, I was wearing a very special pair of shoes.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about the shoes.
We're admiring those shoes, actually.
Well, it came to the point when the book was printed, or it was late getting printed, and they were able to give me 30 advance copies. And I was on my way to the airport when they gave them to me. And I got to the airport, and the book weighs just over 1 kilo. So we've got 30 kilos of books, and I had them in my suitcase. And they said, you're overweight. And I said, well, how much for excess baggage? And they said, $70 a kilo. Oh. And I said, no, that's not going to happen. So I threw everything out of my bag except the books. I arrived in the middle of winter into London in a pair of shorts and a T-shirt and my thongs.
Wow. And
my mate picked me up from the airport. We went up to see John, the skipper. He's met me before, and he knows I'm a fairly casual dresser. Anyway, but not this casual in the middle of winter. And he just opened the door, and I just, oh, Michael. And I said, it's okay, John. I'm going out to buy some trousers and shoes. And I told him the story, and he loved that story.
Yeah.
And he said, what size shoe do you take? And I said, 8.5. And he said, oh, I've got some pairs of shoes I don't wear. And I said, John, I don't want your shoes. And he said, no, I don't wear them. So he brought me out 3 beautiful pairs of shoes, and I said, John, I'll take one pair. So I chose one pair of shoes. Now, these shoes I have taken with me everywhere. I wear these shoes even in the middle of summer. I'll put them on and walk out to the wreck site. I've taken these shoes to the Shepherd's Hotel in Cairo, where John used to go to drink. These shoes have had a drink there. We've been to Malame, these shoes have been to Retimo, to Hurak, everywhere John went. We've walked up the stairs that John used to walk up in these shoes. I've worn these shoes to the prisoner of war camp John spent his time in. I've been to the beaches of Greece, where John picked up all the ANZACs in these shoes.
Wow.
To Porto Raftis. I walked down on that beach. And so these shoes have been everywhere with me for that. And lots of people will say, oh yeah, I walked in the footsteps of heroes. I walk in his actual shoes.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And whenever I give a presentation or talk to people about Greece and Crete and about John, I wear his shoes. So they're a very, very special pair of shoes. And I'm not a real shoe person, but these are very, very comfortable shoes.
What a story.
How good was that?
And it's important to mention as well, people are going to be thinking, okay, what do these shoes look like? Michael is wearing a suit at the moment. Sports coat, let's say, with a nice button-up shirt, and these shoes do not look out of place in this makeup.
John was a very proper gentleman.
Yes,
a very well dressed man. I think these were handmade shoes.
Wow.
So
what a story, Nick.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just blown away. What a great story, Michael. And you walked those shoes walked you from the station to here.
Oh yes, they did. They did. They did. Yeah. Oh, they've been everywhere. They've been to 42nd Street. They've been everywhere. These shoes.
Wow. Fantastic.
With the Greek and Cretan dust on them.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like the old backpackers used to put a flag on their backpack of every city they've been to or country they've been to. You'll have to start doing that on your shoes, John. Your shoes have been everywhere.
I think I might.
Outstanding.
Thanks for sharing that. It's a great story.
And you're also researching and compiling the first nominal roll for every Australian Army personnel who embarked for Greece and Crete. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Since I've been working with Nick and friends with Nick, what we've talked about so much is so many Australians are not aware of what happened in Greece or Crete, or even if their relations went to Greece and Crete. They just don't know. I give a presentation and people say, oh, I think my grandfather was there, but I'm not sure. It just doesn't seem foremost in their minds. You can say Tobruk and everybody goes, yeah, Tobruk. Kokoda, yeah, Kokoda. All of these places people know. Yep. If you say Gallipoli, people say, oh, ANZACs. And then you mention, well, what about the second ANZACs? What do you mean, second ANZACs? People don't realise this. So Nick and I have so often talked about raising the awareness of this throughout Australia. And one of the things that I thought it would be a very simple task is to go and find the names of everybody who embarked and went to Greece and Crete. It just wasn't. Yeah. The records were destroyed. They didn't keep records. A rucksack got stolen with the records on Sfakia Beach. The records went down on the Costa Rica. They burnt the records. They burnt all the pay records. They destroyed records. So they don't exist.
Right.
In many cases. So it took me almost 3 years, and I was very fortunate. I followed one lead and found what they call routine orders. Mm-hmm. The National Archives in Melbourne holds the routine orders for every World War II unit, but they'd never been examined. Nobody had ever looked at them. There's 7,212 files, and nobody had ever looked at them.
Wow.
I actually had to make application to get them released. Mm-hmm. So I got the ones released that would fit for Greece and Crete. And I started to go through these. That's, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of pages. But what it did get for me, looking at hospital admissions, missing in actions, and they did have embarkation lists as well. I was able to compile a nominal roll of every army personnel who went to Greece and Crete. Mm. Now, the official historian, Gavin Long, speaks about 17,000 Australians embarking Percy Spender, the then Minister for the Army, also brings this up in Parliament when the opposition are asking him questions about, well, how many people did embark? He says also around 17,000. I've confirmed now well over 18,000.
Wow.
A lot of the non-combatants, the service personnel that went, I mean, I think 58,000 approximately, Brits and Australia, New Zealand, all of these, 58,000, 35 were combatants, 23,000 non-combatants. And often they didn't include the non-combatants in their counts.
Okay.
They didn't include anti-aircraft protection on the ships. They didn't include tiny little units like the Second First Kit Store where 2 people went. The mobile bacteriological unit, 1 person went. Movement control, 1 person. But they all add up.
Yeah.
And I think, as Nick and I have spoken about so much, it's getting recognition. And if families realise that their relations actually did go, perhaps they'll start to see some importance in the medals that are just tossed away in a drawer or that are being put on eBay, rather than just some monetary value for a letter or a postcard. You know, I can get $10 for that on eBay. I hope that people, and this is what we talk about with these untold stories, is to get to people to realise the importance. Once you put a letter or a postcard into a context, it gives meaning to it. And I think once the meaning's established, hopefully it'll give some significance to the family. A postcard has, 180 characters on it? How many characters do you get in a tweet? These were the original tweets.
Yeah.
These were tweets from the front.
Yeah, good point.
Just these quick little snapshots. But if they're in context and people start to see the importance of them and what their relations did and the sacrifices they made, I really think that it'll start to raise the awareness. So the nominal role, I'm now just finishing off a book that will carry the nominal role with a lot of stories I've collected, untold stories. People haven't heard these stories before. Hopefully once the book's there, then Nick and I have been talking about, I've got a database that we'll make freely available for people to add to this database. With the nominal role, I mean, if any of your listeners ever wanted me to tell them if they had a relation that was in Greece or Crete, I can tell them in less than 30 seconds.
Wow.
And I can give them the references for that as well. So that's the reason I've been working on the nominal role for so long. And it had never been done before. People would say to you, well, now you know why nobody ever did it before. Because it's been quite a task.
Wow.
So Michael, what was the final number?
At the moment, I think I've got 18,163.
Australians that served overseas.
Australians
in
that
World
served
War II.
overseas. I've included some perhaps that embarked or went to Greece later. If you look at units such as the Graves Inquiry Units or the Searcher Teams, I think the job they did and the contribution they made to the Battle of Greece and the Battle of Crete in bringing closure to the lost or the missing, I think they need to be included in any nominal role, even though they embarked a little bit later. I've included them as well. Of course, I've noted that these people did embark later.
Are these people down as being enlisted men?
Oh yeah, they're enlisted. The numbers are there. Any service personnel has a service number, with the prefix NX for New South Wales, QX for Queensland, etc. The problem is that these numbers are attached to anything they do, and they do have a service record. But the problem with the service records that the National Archives carry now is that there were 3 copies of the service record, what we call the B103s. There was a travelling copy, a base copy, and a unit copy. This meant that they were spread out, and they were meant to be married up, and they never got married up in many cases. So when you go to the archives and pull out a service record for a particular person, often there'll be a gap. It could be a year. But the gaps you find in the service records for Greece and Crete are very, very common, because all their travelling service records would have been destroyed. So you've got a 2 or a 3 month gap in the service records. So often people will say to records, did my relation go to Greece or Crete? And they say, we have no record of this. I've been able to trace them now. Over 18,000
Over 18,000.
So it's a battalion and a half more than Gavin Long or Percy Spender tallied up. But I think that I'm working from a much better standpoint, that I've got access to a lot more than those people did. And I think that their tallies at that time, they did a pretty good job.
Wow.
A pretty good job with
Fantastic. We're so happy that you're here with us today, Michael, to impart your knowledge, and there's going to be some great stories told. But before we get to that, Nick Andriotakis, welcome again. And we already know that you're a Greek wine expert from the last episode that we did here, but you have a very keen interest in World War II and in particular the Battle of Crete. Just explain to everyone what your connection is to it.
Yeah, so the story for our family starts with my father being about 8 years old and being asked by his parents to, in the village, to take some food to a Commonwealth soldier. They called him the Iglesia, but he could have been Australian, he could have been a New Zealander. He was evading capture from the Nazis. And the story sort of starts there, but more closer to it is being in the Cretan dancing group at the age of 17, 18, around that period. You know, we'd all don our vrakias and our boots and our knife around our waist with the belt, and around our head, the dakaria to polemisti, the tears of the warrior, which is like a kerchief embroidered, or it's crocheted, and we'd be in the dancing group and so forth. But one of the things we used to do also was go to Anzac Day to march with the diggers. So one Anzac Day, we all huddled there. The Greeks went there, the Cretans went there, and we're up the top of George Street, and the diggers are all getting together with their suits and their hats and their medals and the rosemary tucked on their lapels. They're all lining up. I was just standing on the footpath, probably just watching, and this digger said to me, "Hey, young lad, come over here." So I walked over there, and he says, "You're from Crete, aren't you, son? You stand next to me." That's how I did that, you know. Well, about half a minute later, this man with a white hat and a special uniform, it was probably one of the Anzac marshals. With hindsight, obviously, I worked with it. He says, "Excuse me, young man, you can't stand here." "Why, mate?" "These people saved my life. The boy staying here is marching with me." "Sorry, mate, he can't stay. He's got to go out the back with the ethnics."
Wow.
They started arguing, but in the end, I did go out the back with the ethnics. But not now. Now I'm here, and we're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about all those Australians that went there to defend Greece. Whether you believe it was a just cause or not, the fact is they went there. And they were there with the Greek people side by side, and that's why we're here. We're in this beautiful country, and this country's given a lot of opportunity to a lot of people that came. And like you said before, Nick and Tom, we came here as a direct result of Oihide. So when the Greeks said no, and they beat a much superior force in Albania and Nipiros, that's when Churchill decided that this country deserves to be supported, and he sent the English in and the Commonwealth forces. And part of that formation were the Australian New Zealanders, the ANZACs. The country was decimated during the Second World War. Greece lost 800,000 people, about 10% of its population.
Yeah.
It lost the biggest Jewish community in Europe.
Is that right?
Yeah. Starvation, firing squads, executions, all of these things. And then there was a political vacuum after the Second World War. And in that political vacuum started the Civil War. And so by 1950, this place was ravaged by war, destruction for 10 years.
Yep.
And there wasn't much. There was a whole generation, our parents' generation, that had no education, no schooling, no clothes, no medicine. And these people, by this time, were 20 years of age. By 1950, they were 20 to 25 to 18. And they were young, and they wanted to do something with their lives. And because of the ANZACs in Greece, and because of the relationships that were set up, they reported back. And they knew these people were good people. And Australia accepted a lot of Greeks from the 1950s all the way to the 1970s and even today. But it all started there. Wow. And that's why we're in Australia. That's why we're in Canada, in Germany, in the United States. The post-World War II immigration starts because the Greeks said no, and the Greeks, as the quotes from Hitler, from Stalin, from all those people, they were the ones that resisted. They really resisted.
Yeah.
And sure, they lost and they suffered. And we're here. We're here in Australia. We're fortunate to be in Australia. But that's why we're here. And I hope people listening to this story see Ohi Day as a day that deserves its recognition, its proper recognition, and it's more relevant to post-World War II Greeks in Australia.
Just for those who maybe don't know the plight of the Greek people during World War II, I've got a small story that my grandfather tells, my papu here, who's been in the country since 55. He always tells the story, because he was born in 38, 39, so born in the midst of the war. He says to us often that one of his earliest memories as a child is being in his cot and crying without ceasing for hours on end, to the point where his mother would say, she's at her wit's end, why are you crying? And his response, through tears was, I'm hungry. And they didn't have anything to give him. On the back of something like that, his village in particular, there is not one family in that village that doesn't have relatives in Australia now, all because of what happened during that war.
That's right.
It's unbelievable. And that's just one small story.
Yeah. It's this huge amount of stories.
So the story of that experience on Anzac Day has never left me. But also the stories of our parents' generation have never left me either. Shared as growing up and that.
Yep.
And so these stories need to be told. These stories won't be told by the next generation. And our parents' generation are dying off. Like my father passed away this year, and I took him back to Crete and buried him there in the village, where the Germans were marching in 1941. I hope that we can, as a community, move forward and take Ohi Day and elevate it to a much more relevant place in this society.
Yeah, well said, Nick. Very moving, very touching, and a lot of Greeks could resonate with what you said. Actually, nearly all Greeks in Australia would resonate with what you said.
That's why we're here.
But they couldn't have put it in the words that you've put it in.
That's right.
That's a good story.
Well done, Nick.
We obviously all heard that intro, and in light of what we've discussed here, maybe start with yourself, Michael. Why is Greece an important part of the story of World War II? What's the seminal part in this?
I have a quote here from Hugh Gilchrist from 2004 that I think really sums it up. He says, of all the episodes in Australia's relations with Greece, Australia's part in the 1941 campaign is the most important. It lasted less than 2 months and ended with military defeat. But it profoundly changed the way in which these two nations viewed each other. I think what Nick just said, that sums it up exactly. It's how Greece and Australia look at each other now, how they view each other, how they feel about each other. For me, when I was a young backpacker, of course, I went to Greece and looked around Greece and partied around Greece. But to actually go back to Greece and do the archaeology of Greece, and then to find World War II and the connection between Greece and Australia, I think that word profound is probably an understatement when it comes to that. It's the connection for me. I love everything Greek. Yeah. I mean, really, it's just part of me now. I'm going back to Crete in August to excavate again, and it's just so exciting to actually be able to think about actually putting my foot and my shoes back on the wreck site again, and where I'll work on the wreck, but I'll also work on the ancient stuff as well. The woman I work with, Elpida, she doesn't understand how I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I run to the site, and it's 4 kilometres away. She says, we'll drive at 7 o'clock. And I said, no, I'm getting over there early because I just the experience.
It's very Greek, isn't it, Nick?
The experience to sit there and, I mean, and just take it all in. It's quite an amazing feeling. People, when they find out you're an archaeologist, there's a lot of questions. One of the questions is, have you ever found anything? And you think, well, I've been an archaeologist for 40 years, and I think that any businessman, if they'd been losing money for 40 years, they would have got out a long, long time before that. Of course, I've found some of the most incredible things.
Yeah.
When they find out I do underwater archaeology, the next question is, have you found any gold? Have you found any gold? I think Titanic did that to underwater archaeology or maritime archaeology, and people expect there to be treasure. And interestingly...
here we go.
Interestingly, you're really... When I was working on the wreck, a couple of the local shepherds came over and they said, you're looking for the gold. What gold? What gold? This is a landing craft that carried tanks. El Peter did the interpreting for me, and what it seems is that there'd been a lot of people who had come to this wreck site looking for gold. They believed that the British ships carried gold bullion.
Right.
And I found documents that said they did carry gold bullion, but ship to shore and shore to ship. I mean, these landing craft did 3 knots and they had 1 gun. If you've got a lot of gold, you don't put it on an underarmed ship. But also the skippers carried gold sovereigns. Okay. Because the local people, the local currency was of no use, so they were paid in gold.
And these are the liras which I mean,
people wear
jewelry,
rings and necklaces.
They get married with them.
Yeah, they get. Well, we got them for our wedding.
So did I.
Yeah, same here. I've got a few. Actually, did the crevati when you get married.
Absolutely,
we had a few letters chucked on the crevati as well.
That's it.
As well as the nearest child you see. We had a nearest boy.
Yeah, that's
the youngest.
That's from all the way from Ipiro to Crete, that one.
Yeah, really.
I got chucked on at age 21 at one stage. I was the youngest one in the crowd.
Did it work? Did they have a boy?
Actually, no, it didn't.
Okay, it worked for us. Yeah, so first one was a boy. So for those listeners out there, the tradition is when you get married, is it the women that make the bed?
Yes.
First bed. You throw coins on for...
Who are supposed to be virgins, might I add.
Is that what it was?
Okay. Yeah, they're supposed to be.
Okay. Meant to be virgins. Yeah. And they threw coins on the bed for good luck, I guess.
Everyone throws money on the bed.
And then you throw your preferred gender for your first child to be born.
That's right. They also throw rice and rose petals too.
Correct.
I can't remember who we threw, but it was definitely a boy. We threw a boy on the bed. And I think the boy we threw on the bed started to pocket all the money that was on the bed. But, hey, what are you doing?
They throw apart from the coins, the $50 notes came out.
It was all notes and letters we had.
And the Cretans do this well, really well, don't they? With notes. And no,
it's
not the Cretans. It's the Cypriots.
Cypriots.
What's the Cretan tradition?
The Cretans don't. They just stare at
the dagger, mate.
The dagger.
Shoot guns in the air.
That's it.
And the gunshots in the air.
That's it. Well, mate, that's
even
just
in Australia, I've seen it.
Really?
Absolutely.
Well, that's just when
I'm
they're
not
having a barbecue.
But the guns have been shot in Australia.
Wow. Okay.
Oh dear, we're getting sidetracked. But
we have. You haven't lived to been to a Cretan wedding.
I know. I think the Tipura was trying to knock on the door of us. I mean, it's obviously important to note that there is a strong connection between Australia and Greece in World War II. I mean, we've seen pictures of diggers wearing slouch hats up on the Acropolis. There are countless stories, lesser known accounts of ANZACs in Crete and Lemnos, aren't there?
They are, and there were 1,500 escapers and invaders throughout Greece, and we'll touch on some of those stories today. And there's a great interaction between the Greek people and Australians and New Zealanders. Part of it's the larrikinism, part of it's the camaraderie, to the point where Australia doesn't have very many friends that it can rely on in all conflicts over the 20th century. And one of those friends and allies has been Greece in every conflict.
Is that right?
Greece and Australia have agreed in every conflict, along with the United States, obviously, England, the UK and New Zealand and France. But there's a special thing that Australia has with Greece, and that is over 2,500 Australians of Greek heritage have served Australia, from the Boer War in South Africa to the First World War, to Gallipoli, to France, Greece, Crete, Tobruk, Bardia, New Guinea, Kokoda.
Wow.
These are Greeks,
Vietnam.
Greeks serving in the
Australians of Greek heritage serving Australia.
Wow.
New Guinea.
Fantastic.
Unbelievable.
There's a lot of interwoven connections. There are memorials all over New South Wales and Canberra and Victoria and other parts of Australia that identify Greece and Crete, Lemnos, Macedonia, the Salonika front, the nurses in Salonika in 1916.
Wow.
For the benefit of our listeners, maybe outside Australia and New Zealand, who are the ANZACs? Real quick summary.
So the ANZACs are basically Australian New Zealand Army Corps. They were formed in Gallipoli. The first ANZAC Corps was formed in 1915, and the second ANZAC Corps was formed in Greece in early April, when there was a speech there by General Blamey, who was also commander in Gallipoli in the First World War. Mm-hmm. And he said, as from 1800 hours, the 12th of April, Australian Corps will be designated ANZAC Corps. In the making of this announcement, the ANZAC Corps desires to say that it has reunion of the Australian New Zealand divisions, give all ranks the greatest uplift. The task ahead, though difficult, is not nearly so desperate as that which our fathers faced in April 26 years ago. We go in together with stout hearts and the certainty of success, even though in the end it was a failure, like Gallipoli too. So there are many parallels. However, it's about the human stories, it's about the interaction of Australians and Greeks that is the most interesting, and I hope we can touch on some of those.
Well, before we get into these stories, just quickly on the situation in Greece at that time, the context. Why was Prime Minister Metaxas' response to the Italian ultimatum so important? It really did influence the outcome in the course of that war, didn't it?
It did, because all of a sudden you only had the United Kingdom was obviously opposing. Germany had overrun Northern Europe in a matter of days and weeks, but here you had the first defeat of the Axis powers. Yeah. The Oichi and the Greek defence and pushback of the Italians, and the defeat of the Italians in Epirus and in pushed back all the way to Albania, that was their first defeat. So something that should have been simple for an industrial superpower of the time to get rid of a backward agrarian nation, really, that's what Greece was, didn't result. And then Germany had to come down. They had to come down and wipe the mess. That took resources, that took supplies, people. It took a lot of things. And Greece is fighting Germany and Italy from October the 28th, 1940, all the way to the 1st of June. Then the Greeks are still fighting. Yeah. The guerrilla fighters and the civilian population, the first time the Nazis encountered civilian resistance of scale was in Greece, where men, women and children and all men, they defended their place. This was liberty. They just got liberty, from the Turks in the early parts of the 20th century. And 30 odd years later, they were losing it again. And they were having none of it. And that's why you can call them crazy, you can call them fearless, you can call them whatever you want. And they paid the price. They lost 10% of their population, but they stood up and they defended themselves. And what that did, that sucked up the resources. It delayed the eventual invasion of Russia. And that's why Stalin, that's why the Russian general talks about those things in the quotes, because it sucked up so many resources and delayed the invasion of Russia into the Russian winter and gave time for the Russians, and like it happened to Napoleon, it happened to Hitler. Yeah. The Russian
so that was
winter.
Operation Barbarossa, wasn't it?
Yeah, Operation Barbarossa was the Russian campaign. Operation Marita was the Greek campaign, and Operation Mercury was the Battle of Crete, the Cretan campaign.
Right, okay.
And that's why we identify Greece and Crete, even though Crete obviously is part of Greece, we identify them as separate campaigns, and it was a separate battle and a separate type of battle.
So as we know, the delay of taking on Russia, the Germans literally froze to death, and that was the turning point of the war. Yeah. So essentially, if it wasn't for the Greeks delaying the Germans or putting such a big fight up to the Germans, it delayed them going into Russia, which eventually turned the tide in World War II. It
was the Greeks, it was the ANZACs, it was the Commonwealth soldiers, the British. They were defeated there, and it was the Greek people. It was a collection of all those things, of people that believe in freedom, do not believe in subjugation by conquest, and they stood up to it.
The time it took for certain Northern European countries to capitulate. You and I, Nick, have discussed this previously in one of our discussions.
One of many.
How long did it actually take, for example, for the Germans to overrun the French versus how long it took?
I think it was about 8 days.
8 days versus something like...
Well, the Battle of Crete was 11.
And Crete's just one island in Greece.
Yeah, and to overrun Greece, it started on the 6th of April and into May.
And is that the longest resistance during the war?
Yeah. I mean, there was resistance later in Russia, obviously, but at that time, it was all downhill. After Greece and Crete, it was all downhill for the Germans. Downhill. Just think about the Battle of Greece and the Battle of Crete as a Thermopylae. It's like that, so the battles are lost, but the war is won eventually. Yeah.
Well, now that you mentioned that, Nick, you've got a bit of a story here. This is going to lead us into the plethora of stories that we've got, the lesser-known stories from World War II. But Nick, Hill 731, this is a story that you know fairly well. Tell us a little bit about that, because you've mentioned it to me previously as a modern-day Thermopylae.
It was in Mount Trebuchet in Albania. So it was a battle that went from the 9th of March to the 24th of March. It didn't go for too long. But what it was, as Nick pointed out, the Greeks pushed the Italians back to southern Albania and they dug in. The Italians were obviously humiliated, and Mussolini himself wanted to impress Hitler, so he needed to win this particular battle. So he essentially had all his high-powered ranked troops in Albania. Even Mussolini himself went into Albania on the 2nd of March to watch this battle, which started on the 9th. And it was described as the Verdun of the Greco-Italian War. And also it was referred to the Thermopylae that didn't fall, so to your point. So the way this battle started, the Italians had 190 planes, 70 of those were bombers, and they bombed the Greek line, which was the main part of there was a 6-kilometre range, and the main part of that range was Hill 731. So 731 is the metres above sea level of this hill. So they bombed it from the evening of the 8th of March, the late evening to the early morning of the 9th of March. And then once that stopped, they had 300 cannons, and some of those cannons were about a metre apart. And they, again, I had to read this over and over, it was 100,000 shells they fired at the Greek line.
100,000 shells?
Again, call it approximate. I'd read others was 150, 200, but I think the last transcript I read was 100,000, and we're being generous. Whatever it was, even if it was 10,000, it sounds a lot.
But when you say 100,000, even if some of them were duds.
But so that started at 6 a.m. And then from then on, the troops started to march through. And the Italians thought the Greeks would be dead. No one would have survived that barrage. However, they dug themselves so deep that not all of them died. There was a lot of Greeks. And as we know, the Greeks were heavily outnumbered. We had poor weapons. And the first battle started where the Italians started charging up this hill. And the Greeks were using their old weapons. I think most of them were still World War I weapons. The Italians were gaining on them, and the Greeks realised these weapons weren't doing anything. So they had fixed bayonets. I thought, you know what, let's go. And they just charged at the Italians, they were heavily outnumbered, charge at the Italians, and then they pushed them back. And this went on and on and on. The Greeks had the 1st Thessaly Infantry Division, and most of those troops from Trikala and Karditsa. Where the Italians had the 8th Army Corp and 2 elite black shirt battalions and other divisions as reserves. So again, they were heavily outnumbered, heavily outgunned. However, the Greeks did not take a backward step from the 18 raids that the Italians charged up on that hill and along that 6-kilometre stretch. And some of those battles, or some of those charges, it ended up being hand-to-hand combat where Greeks were using rocks and the butts of guns and bayonets as well, just to draw back the Italians. And there's a couple of generals. There was Major Dimitrios Kaslas, and he had his 2 lieutenant colonels up there, Ketsias and Georgioulas. There was words to the effect was, we're all going to die up here, is what they told their generals, and they told all their soldiers, they go, we're not moving from this spot, we're all going to die up here. So, and they had to fight to their death, which again sounds like Thermopylae. They weren't going to give up an inch of their land anymore, and they stuck to it. And this battle went on and on and on, to the point there was a lot of manuscripts written by the Italian soldiers as well. And they said one of the assaults, they described it as counterattack of the beasts. This is how ferocious the Greeks were. And there was another story as well where a white flag was raised and the Italian Catholic priests went up and stretcher bearers went up to take, the wounded. And when they got to the hill, they could just see limbs and guns and screaming in agony how humans can be so cruel to each other. And the Greeks, and the stench, they describe what the stench was. It was just a putrid smell of human dead flesh. And there was a big cheer because the wind had changed and it was blowing away from the Greek section to the Italian section. And the Greeks had a big roar because they had enough of smelling this stench, and it was going towards the Italian soldiers. But that was just the resilience of the Greek soldiers. They didn't give up, didn't give an inch. Even to the 19th of March, which was the last raid, where the Italians had 4 tanks come up. So there's no other way of defeating these guys. So a couple of tanks rolled up. And again, Greeks, same thing. They got pushed back a little bit, but then they regathered, they regrouped, and they counterattacked. Guys like Yorgos Tsadas, who I believe ran to one tank and threw a couple of grenades and blew up that tank and so forth. So they ended up defeating this tank regiment with these primitive weapons and so forth. That war ended on the 26th of March, which essentially broke the Italians' morale and spirit, and they retreated. And that was another reason why Hitler had to come in, take over. Again, I'm not doing this story any justice, but just a snippet of the heroic fighters.
It's just one of many stories that there are from this period of history. And again, we're going to hear some other stories right now that are sort of lesser known as well. Not necessarily battles. These are more personal stories. Yeah. Nick, well done on your research, by the way. That was outstanding.
Oh, thank you, mate.
You've done well. Well, before we get into these other stories,
I need a shot at Tibro, Tom.
Well, I was just going to say, Nick, what should we be drinking next?
We just stay on the barrelized Tibro.
Should we go barrelized? Good stuff.
Yeah, because the next story is there. It's in Kozani. It's in that region of Macedonia, and maybe we stay there for a little while.
So this is an Anzac and his flag, is it?
That's right. Yeah. So Reginald Trezise from Melbourne, from Victoria. He's in.
Sounds good.
He's in Kozani, and I'm going to read straight out of the National Archives. He writes a letter and tells the story to the Mayor of Kozani after the war.
Okay.
And the letter is in the National Archives because it was a letter around military history or events, and it was censored by the Australian government. It's in the National Archives. And he writes to the Mayor of Kozani and he says, "Dear Sir, just 18 years ago, almost to this very day, Australian troops were in Greece in the futile struggle with the Nazis for the freedom of your beautiful and historic country. With the 6th Australian Division, I was up as far as Florina, where we met the Germans. We landed at Piraeus, went north by truck, Thebes, Livadia, Amphissa, Lamia, Pharsala, Larissa, Elasson, Servia, all through the paths and up through the Aliakmon River to Plataea, and up the mountains to Florina, where we quickly were driven back. On the 13th of April, some of us sheltered in Kozani. We found a school to stop at the night. It was cold and wet. The Germans were shelling, bombing all the while via Grevena. So he's talking about all these towns that he remembers vividly in his letter to the Mayor of Kozani. And we came south, and now here it was in this school where I mentioned, badly damaged, bombed. I remember a statue at the entrance was blown over the school. It had 2 floors, and on the bottom floor there was a room, and books, and a musical bugle and the like. And amidst all the rubble and the dust, standing in the corner of this room, attached to a pole, about 7 foot long, stood the flag of Greece, made of silk and surrounded with gilt, corded edging. To me, this flag looked proud and defiant, and I didn't topple over in the dust and disorder caused by war. So I took it from its pole and placed it in my haversack. The Germans, only a matter of time, who knows what they would have done with it. They would have sold it off or taken it. I thought they would send it home as a souvenir, but I had it. We had a hard day's fighting, an evasion, and we finally crossed the Corinth Canal and down through the Peloponnese. We crossed the river southeast, the Aliakmon, and down the Peloponnese. Finally, I embarked at Monevasia on a British destroyer and went to Crete, where the war opened up with greater ferocity than ever. And I lost everything I had, but I still had this Greek flag, wrapping it around my body to keep me warm. The only thing that came out of Crete was my life and the flag. Then I went to Egypt and Palestine, and I fought the Vichy French, which these were the Nazi French, in Syria. And I noticed I showed the flag to the Turkish soldiers and the Syrians, and they wanted to buy it, but no, I returned to Australia with it. I refitted, trained hard, and this time I went again, and the Greek flag was my emblem, my good luck. I carried it in my kit bag through the Pacific campaign, through New Guinea, and all these years have passed, and I find the flag of Greece, safely preserved, as proud, defiant as ever, and an Australian soldier who has faith in it, and faith in Greece, as a staunch ally of the Western democracies, and especially of our British Commonwealth, wishes to return the proud flag to its old school. For scores of men and women who were children in the fateful days must have known this particular flag. Sir, so as the flag will not go astray, and so that it will be returned to its rightful place, I will not send it until I hear from you. Backward glances over travel roads in Greece brings to my mind a kindly, gracious people who shared with us their food, their shelter, ever helpful to us. So we should get away safely, risking their lives for our advantage. Many of our men lie there today beside yours in what we believe was a just cause. Once again, we must be prepared and stick together, for we have won our freedom, and it's hard. As the forces of evil and subjugation on the march will I enclose you a small sketch map, and which I've drawn of the school, and I've printed on this letter, so they who may be deciphered or translated will have no trouble with the English language, can find it. Please let me know if you receive this note and how to send the flag back. Greetings to the warm-hearted people of your country and its brave soldiers, from the members of the IF, yours sincerely, Reg Trezise. And there's a map. So you could see the feeling and the passion of some of the ANZACs in what they believed was a just cause. The mayor wrote to him, and the flag went back, and they had a ceremony. And ANZAC Reginald Trezise was saved by the Greek flag, by its, I suppose, the spirit around it and the spirit of the people, and he acknowledged that in that letter.
What a story! And then he returned the flag back to the school.
Flag, yeah.
Wow.
Did he go to Greece with it, or did he?
No, he didn't. He lived his days out on the edge of Melbourne, in an orchard area called Monbulk.
Okay.
And he passed away later. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he was in Kozani defending the school, saw the flag that was in the square.
Standing upright in the
upright.
rubbles inside one of the school
So
rooms.
still upright.
Yeah.
The flag
yeah.
didn't even fall.
No.
So
There was rubble, there was dust, there was holes, there was catastrophe.
Wow. And the Germans were advancing.
Yeah, and he took it.
He went up, took it, put it in his...
Yeah, took it all the way.
Wow.
Kokoda, New Guinea, went everywhere.
And the thing that really sort of struck me there is that he was made offers to sell it when he had nothing else.
Yeah.
And he decided to hold on to it.
That's right. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
This is the human spirit. What you're seeing here, it doesn't belong to any particular group of people. It belongs to all people. And this is an Australian ANZAC showing that, and the mayor of Kozani had a big ceremony and was so grateful, and the flag went back.
Wouldn't you love to go see that, Nick?
We might have to put on our agenda, Tom.
I think so.
Yeah.
If we ever head back over there.
It's there. It's there. I think it's on display there at the school or in the town hall.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
If we ever do a series in Greece, Tom, we'll have to put that on our agenda.
Absolutely.
Wow, what a story, Nick. Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that. That was awesome.
That's a great way to kick it off.
Yeah.
Michael, you've got a few stories as well that you've brought to us. Where did you want to start?
As Nick knows, before COVID, I was doing a lot of presentations going around talking to people about the Battle of Greece and the Battle of Crete. The last section of my presentation, I'd always say, well, I've just told you one of those untold stories. I believe very strongly that a story told is a life lived. We talked about there's so many stories out there that probably get shared around the family table, and that's it. They go no further. At the end of the presentations, I'll just say, anybody got any stories? And I have been very, very fortunate in some of the stories that I've been told. And the material I've been given access to. These stories have never been out there. Nobody's ever talked about them. One of the stories, a woman came up and said, "Oh, my uncle Ross Hamilton Smith. He was in North Africa He was in North Africa, then over to Greece and into Crete. And he was a prolific writer. I've got copies of all his letters, of all his diaries now. There must be 250,000 words that he's written about Greece and Crete and all of these places. Then she told me a great story. His diary that he'd been keeping since he first enlisted, 1st of January 1940, he lost the diary. Well, he didn't lose the diary. They took the diary off him before they deployed him to Greece. You had to hand in diaries.
Right.
You had to hand in cameras. They were supposed to be packed up and sent to the kit store in Alexandria. But for some reason, Ross's diary got caught up in the material going over to Greece. So his diary actually stowed away on the ship going over to Greece. Now, it went up into the mountains of Greece, probably under some bully beef tins or something. And Ross Hamilton Smith never knew his diary was there. He started to keep another diary of his times in Greece. In the front of this first diary, he had written, "If anybody finds this diary, could you please send it back to my mother? Here's her address in Inverell." 1946, he got a letter from an Austrian who was serving with the German army in Greece. After the evacuation, they were going through, and I guess they went through the supply dump. This man found Ross Hamilton Smith's diary.
Unbelievable.
They gave me the letters that this man wrote, saying, well, I don't know if Ross lived through the war, but hopefully this will give you some sort of solace having his diary returned. And he sent the diary back in 1946.
Wow.
And I've been given access to that diary. And I mean, that diary plus the others, and the way he speaks about what he did in North Africa, certainly, but then when he went into Greece and Crete, he describes it with such detail. And once again, he, as Nick was saying, he talks about the Greek people. He talks about the Cretan people, how they helped and how beautiful the country was. I think at one point he says, oh, this is just like home, if I can ever get back there. And it's just lines like that, and your heart sort of goes, whoa. You know, he tells stories where your heart beats fast. He tells stories when a tear comes to your eye. He tells stories when you have a laugh. Yeah. Because he's with his mates. To have that diary returned from Greece is pretty special.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It is.
And that was returned by a German soldier, well, an Austrian. An Austrian soldier. And I've got all the letters, by the enemy. Yeah. And he'd found it and kept it from 1941.
Unbelievable.
And taken it back with him to Germany.
What a story.
Are these sentiments of, where we feel as though we're at home or we're enamoured of the Greek people, are these across the board?
I think it's an underlying theme, or it's a theme that ties any of the readings that you do. Even in the official war diaries kept by the battalions, you'll note things like that. They talk about troop movements and things like that, but then they talk about, the beautiful snow-capped mountains, and looking back down through the valleys and the gorges. And they do. Even the official diaries speak about that. But personal diaries are more about their interaction with the people. Ross's diaries, as I say, he was a prolific writer. He starts off with a letter to his brother by saying, well, what we copped in Crete was nobody's business. I mean, it's the impact of his letters and what he says sometimes really, you can feel it coming through the lines and the page.
Wow.
And another diary that I've come across,
go for it.
which is a very, very unusual diary. It was a diary kept by a platoon sergeant, a leader of the 2nd 7th Battalion. And he kept a diary of the people in his platoon. Now, I don't think other platoon leaders did that. So we're talking about a diary of details on 30 men. In that, you'd expect things like perhaps religion, things like that to be recorded. But this man recorded the hat sizes, the waist, their schooling, their brothers and sisters. He recorded so many details that seemed unnecessary. And with each of the records, he placed a candid photograph, not a photograph taken by when they enlisted or anything like that, but a photograph taken, it looks like, while they were
on duty.
Yeah.
What a resource to have.
And this sort of thing, you know, the diary's completely fallen apart and nobody will get to see it. I don't think anybody will get to see it, but I was fortunate enough to get it copied. To go to that trouble, he must have cared so much about his men.
Wow, another great story there, Michael. Now, Nick, General Paul Cullen, what can you tell us about General Paul?
So General Paul Cullen was originally called Paul Cohen.
Right.
He's a Jewish Australian. He was the son of Sir Samuel Cohen, who was the Honorary Consul General of Greece in Newcastle in the early 1900s.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a connection there with the family, being an Honorary Consul General, his father. So Paul Cohen enlisted. He fought in North Africa, promoted to Major, second command by the time he arrived in Greece. In Greece, what he did very, very cleverly, he converted much of the battalion's cash into gold, which was really good for obtaining rations and support from the local population during the withdrawal to Crete. And he managed to survive the Battle of Tempe. Now, Tempe is up on the slopes of Mount Olympus.
Right.
And also we have a Tempe here in Sydney.
Yes,
which
we
is
do.
named
I was
after
going to say, it's not just down the road here.
the Vale of Tempe.
Where Harry's Cafe is.
So in the Vale of Tempe, a machine gun
content.
fire pierced his uniform, but he survived. So, and then he led his men over the freezing mountains, and about 5 of them got on a small boat and they arrived in Chios, because he was encircled by the Nazis, and they decided to leave on a boat, and they went to Chios, and they could have just gone very quickly to Turkey, a neutral country. They would have got off, and that was the end of it. But this guy he was a fearless warrior. And he decided, you know, we're going to turn back and we're going to go to Crete and join the rest of the Anzac formation there.
Wow.
And so he managed to get off Chios. He got dropped off at Skiathos and stranded there. Paul Cohen and his men, they needed money, they needed to get to Crete somehow. So he looked around and he found this little branch of the Ionian Bank. Very confident, he walked in and he went to the manager and he said, I want to cash a check in. But sir, you don't have an account with us. He says, but I have an account with a commercial company of Sydney. At that point he said, can I see the check, sir? He says, I don't have it on me. And with that, they both started laughing. Right? Behind Paul Cohen was a Greek gentleman in the queue, and he heard the discussion. His name was Kyrios Limos, George Limos. And he says, of course he can have the check. I'll endorse it. And with that, he got £300, supported by Mr. Limos, got the money,
Wow.
got a boat, got his men, got them to Crete.
Wow.
After the war, Paul Cohen, at this point,
Yes.
returned the money to him.
I'm kidding.
On Crete, he led the 16 composite brigades. He went to Malame and he was ready to go, but all of a sudden there was an order for withdrawal. And he recalled after the war, I've always been mystified as why we were not used at Malame. But there's no doubt that our 443 men of the 16th Composite Brigade would have turned the tide at Malame, on which the whole campaign hinged, for if Malame had been held, the Germans could have abandoned the invasion of Crete. Cullen had an impulsive heroism. That was his nature. And it was best captured when he was evacuated from Crete. When his unit's last boat got stuck in the sand, Cullen jumped off, he pushed the boat, and he was left stranded on the beach. They threw a rope at him. He caught the rope and he was dragged back as the Germans were firing at him. Nobody came closer to capture by the Germans than Paul Cullen. His observation in Greece, this is what happened to him. His observation in Greece, the German attitude towards the Jewish people, led him to officially change his name from Cohen to Cullen in September 1941. As a precaution of ever being captured by the Germans, His brother and his relatives in the UK also changed the name from Cohen to Cullen. After Greece and Crete, he served with great distinction in Kokoda, was awarded a Distinguished Service Order, which is a very high, one of the highest awards, and he also got a second one at WWII, commanding the 2nd 1st Battalion in 1946. So there we have a famous Australian of Jewish heritage fighting in Greece and having been influenced and changing his name from the Germans' attitudes to Jewish people in Greece.
Wow.
And he went on and he was also he was awarded the Order of Australia and a highly decorated officer, General Paul Cohen.
The story.
Paul Cohen.
And getting a loan from George in Chios.
Yeah.
The guy behind him in the queue at the bank.
Yeah, that was the difference, and and he repaid the money back.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Filotimo both ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Far out. There you go. Amazing story.
Oh, at that point, we are in Crete now, and with that, let's have a Cretan Nick.
That's a good idea, actually. So we do have a Tsikoudia here, as Nick says, which is
again, it's Cretan Nick is the brand. It's a commercial grade. It's made in Iraq, in the Iraklian region, and again,
good stuff.
and it's imported to Australia. I think by Vicky Tirnavos Imports in Melbourne.
Fantastic.
Great.
Well, with that,
Cheers,
Stiniamas.
boys. Welcome to Crete.
Welcome to
Eviva,
Crete. That's it.
όπως λένε στη Κρήτη.
Viva Crete.
Oh yeah.
Tastes like Crete.
Bring back a few memories there, Michael.
Back there soon.
Well, we're in Crete.
Well, now that we've butted you up, Michael, I think you need another story.
Nick was talking about an Australian of Jewish heritage, but here's something that I came across while I was doing the research, which will probably be quite surprising to many of the listeners. I found a Japanese serviceman, a man born of Japanese parents in Australia, full-blooded Japanese, who wanted to enlist and fight for Australia. He lived in Ballarat, I think, in Ballarat. He tried to enlist, they knocked him back. He tried again, they knocked him back.
Is this before Japan entered the war?
Before Japan entered the
Right.
war. Before Japan entered the war, but you had to be of European descent to be able
Right.
to enlist.
Okay.
He went to Melbourne and was able to enlist. His name was Mario Takasuki. Now, where did he get that first name from? I don't know. He was born in Australia, but to Japanese parents, so I'm guessing that his parents didn't speak English, and they thought they'd give him a good Australian name, and all the people around were called Mario, so they thought that'd be a good name, so they called him Mario. But Mario Takasuka went to Greece and Crete and fought with distinction there, and then went on to New Guinea to fight against the Japanese.
Wow.
But fighting in Greece and Crete. He escaped from Heraklion in a small boat with members of his section, his anti-aircraft section. So when we're talking about an Australian of Jewish descent, we have an Australian of Japanese descent. His brother had been interned, but because he was fighting, his mother also had been interned, but because of letters from the commanders, they let her out of the internment camp.
Wow.
So
the challenges that Mario had in enlisting, did that come down to racism?
Oh yeah.
It
Well,
was
race. I don't know if it was the rule.
So
that you had to be. What did they say? Mainly of European descent to be able to enlist.
Okay.
And I think that's where some people ran into trouble when they wanted to fight.
Wow.
On that point, also, you've got from South Australia. If you look at some of the names of the Australians who went to fight in Greece and Crete, many of them were of German descent.
Right.
And many of them were captured. And what they would have copped in POW camp, just couldn't imagine. A German of German descent, how would have the Australians felt about it? How would have the Germans felt about it? They would have got it from both sides, I think, in many cases.
Germans shooting Germans.
So
it's like Australians fighting for Germany then.
Well, that's what it's like, and
it's crazy.
I mean that even in the service records, you'll see that there were a number of the servicemen of German heritage. They have a little note: committed suicide.
Wow.
Is that right?
In POW camp, but well, we don't know how that goes.
Okay. So did Mario escape? You said he escaped and he came back to Australia?
Oh yeah, he came back. He came back to Australia. His family was involved in setting up the rice industry in Australia. I think it's
Sunrise.
Not Sunrise. No, there's another special. Oh, anyway,
One of the rice companies.
One of the rice companies. But his father set that up and introduced a special type of rice farming in Australia.
Wow, very interesting.
Fantastic.
Nick and I were talking. Nick wants to speak about a gentleman with Greek heritage who fought.
Okay.
And just as a brief introduction to that, as part of the work on the nominal role, I've been looking for Australians of Greek heritage who fought in Greece and Crete.
Mm-hmm.
Hugh Gilchrist, as I've already mentioned, in 2004, had seven names confirmed of Greek heritage who fought in Greece or Crete. I've been able to pick up quite a few more, well, another 5 or 6 so far. I think that, as was pointed out before, that well over 2,000 men and women of Greek heritage served in the armed forces. But what records that exist now leave a lot to be desired, I'm afraid. And there's probably many Australians of Greek heritage that we may never find out about. I think with name changes, places of birth, when we look at Cairo, Alexandria, Cyprus, that there are many people of Greek heritage that we may never be able to uncover, but perhaps the listeners may be able to add something to the list that we've compiled of Australians of Greek heritage who did actually embark to Greece and to Crete. You'll have to excuse my pronunciation. Even though I've spent a lot of time in Greece and Crete, my pronunciation of names is...
we won't hold it against you.
It's okay.
Yeah, but there will be people out there who do, especially if it's their name.
Please give Michael a whole pass here, guys.
But because some of them are name changes.
Right, okay.
So I can get those quite easily.
No
now,
problem.
we have a James Ambrose. We have a Constantine Araroni, who Nick will talk about soon. We have a George John Kaling. A Constantine. So I think they called him Constantine.
Maybe Cypriot?
Christakis Daniels. We've got Michael Doulis. Lionel Victor Gattis. Dennis Karangis. Nicholas Paniotti. Anastasios Stathopoulos.
Anastasios Stathopoulos. Yeah, well done.
And here's a good one for me. This is easy. John William Touranouros.
Okay.
We've got Harris Vasilio. And finally, we've got James Zampiles.
You've done very well, Michael.
Well done.
Very well done.
Look, I'm sure there's
You
there's
deserve a
more.
drink.
Absolutely. Give
I'm
that
sure
man
there's
a
more,
euro.
but as I spoke to Nick about this, that I was looking into these people of Greek heritage, and I said in the upcoming book, I'm going to put a short chapter in there about these people, and I'm going to entitle it "For Kings and for Countries."
Yeah.
So they were fighting for 2 kings and for 2 countries. So
Fantastic.
Great.
Well, on that note, Nick, tell us about Constantine Aroni.
So Constantine Aroni has a rare place in Australian history. There are not many of these rare people, and that they were dual ANZACs. So today we use the word ANZAC to label, Anzac Day to label a lot of things, but there are only 2 Anzac Corps, and that's Gallipoli, 1st Anzac Corps, and Greece Crete, 2nd. Constantine Aroni was born in Kithara in 1893. He was the son of Peter Aroni, and at the turn of the 20th century, he came to Australia and was living in Melbourne. He was involved in both World Wars, enlisting in 1915 at the age of 20. years of age in Gallipoli, and then on to France. And I have here the transcripts from the National Archives again, which talk about his service record, and it says 30th of the 8th, 15, proceeded to Gallipoli, Anzac. He's fighting there, then he gets sick, and then he goes, still Anzac, hospital Malta, then Egypt, and then he gets better, and then he goes France, Belgium, Staples, Camiers, France, England, Portsmouth in England. So he goes through all those theatres of the First World War.
Wow, it sounds like an Australian backpacker.
Yeah. And so he serves there, and
wow.
By 1940 he enlists again, 1939, and he went to the Second Imperial Force, and he fought in Syria, Palestine, North Africa, and onto the Anzac campaign in Greece and Crete. While serving in Greece, his cultural background, his Greek background, was really valuable. He had knowledge of the Greek language and the customs, and after they were overrun in the mainland, and he was in the Peloponnese, he managed to escape to Crete in an open boat, taking 23 soldiers with him. He managed to negotiate in the Greek language, got the boat, with the help of the Greeks, onto Crete, and for that feat he was awarded the British Empire Medal. This is a very courageous man. He's buried in Melbourne. He's had no children, his life, and there he is. And it's all part of the Australian story. Not much is known about him, but what we do know is that he served in both Anzac campaigns, number 1 and number 2.
Wow. Well, there's a name we're not going to forget in a hurry, are we? Constantine Aroni, fought in 2 world wars, survived.
You just think about that, Nick. To be in that many theatres of war across 2 world wars, it is unbelievable to go through both of those and to be active in both of those. And then to end up in the land of your cultural heritage as well.
Yeah. That's mind-boggling. What a story.
So on to that, I've been doing some research over the last few months. I've been cataloguing all the war memorials in New South Wales that refer to Anzacs in Greece. And my research has revealed about between 4 and 6 Australians that fought in the First World War on Lemnos, through Lemnos onto Gallipoli, and they were killed in the Second World War in Greece. So there's, again, dual World War I, World War II, but they lost their life in Greece. They were at the age of 50, the age of 40, in their 40s when they went to Greece in the Second World War.
Wow, so they enlisted in the Australian Army at 40 and 50 years of age.
just at that point. So they'd already been at the age of 18 in 1915 in France and Gallipoli. And then by the time the Second World War started, there was one of them that was 50 years of age. He was a major, and he was also a surgeon.
Wow.
So there's a lot of those very nuances that are coming through.
Think of the level of sacrifice you'd need to make to say, I've served in 1 world war, I've managed to come back.
The Great War.
Yeah.
The Great War. Yeah, the first one.
The war, and to your knowledge, this was the war to end all wars, and then all of a sudden, some 20 odd years later, you're getting the itch again to go back.
Yeah.
And you're not young, you're in your late 40s.
Yeah, 50.
50.
Yeah,
and I know what
50.
that feels like. I struggle to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And these guys are fighting.
They're different times.
Different times.
They're
The
very
self-sacrifice.
difficult times.
Very much so.
It's a different period, different generation.
Why don't we know these stories better? Why aren't these stories being told? It's unbelievable.
The thing is that in today's information age, we think there is a great opportunity to find these, but there's also great distraction.
Yep.
And this country's still finding its way.
Good point.
It's trying, hopefully we'll talk about Captain Reginald Saunders later, an Aboriginal Indigenous Australian that served in Greece and Crete.
Well, let's talk about Reginald.
Yeah, we can talk about him now. And so
He's been in the news lately.
yeah,
There's a metro named after him at Pitt Street.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
he's
right.
got a
Got an
station
outfit.
named after him.
well, that's a great achievement. There's also in 2015 there is a courtyard and a room called the Reginald Saunders Gallery in the Australian War Memorial. There is no room or no space named after any Australian who has served overseas in the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, but there is a Reginald Saunders gallery and a Reginald Saunders courtyard. This is a very significant Australian. This is an Australian who had no right to vote. This is an Australian who had no right to drink or to go in places where European or white Australians did. But he didn't care. He had a heritage in his family of his father and his uncles that actually served, and Indigenous Australians did serve in the First World War. And him and his brother, they enlisted. And Reginald Saunders was in Greece, and then he was in Crete. And he was on the run in Crete for nearly a year. So this is an Australian ANZAC with very dark skin. And if the Germans saw him, he would have stood a mile away. He wasn't a Patrick Lee Firma that could put a moustache on and some Cretan Nick and get away with it. It was hard.
Yeah.
But the Cretans, they saw a human being. They saw a man that needed support, that needed help, and they helped him. And they risked their lives. In the village of Labini in Rethymno, they risked their lives and they supported him. He eventually got off after a year. He went on to fight in New Guinea, and he also fought in Korea.
Wow.
Captain Reginald Saunders, an Australian, Indigenous Australian. And I met his family at North Bondi RSL about 10 years ago. They approached me with one of the famous battles in Crete, the Battle of 42nd Street, and they wanted to do a memorial there. I got behind them with them and worked with them, and they drove it together with Michael Sweet and the Mayor of Kenya, the Cretan Associations here in Victoria and in New South Wales. And there's a memorial at the Battle of 42nd Street, where Captain Reginald Saunders, an Indigenous Australian, fought, as well as the Maori Battalion, where they did the haka, and they had one of their great victories there.
I read that. Actually, I think it was my brother told me the story. He read it in a German diary where there was a young German soldier in Crete, and at night he wrote in the diary where he was scared, and he goes, "I'm really scared. I'm hearing all these weird noises from the opposition, and they sound like savages." And it was the New Zealand Maoris doing a haka, and these Germans had never heard it before, and they were shitting themselves.
Hand-to-hand battle, hand-to-hand combat with bayonets. So Reginald Saunders, there's a great book that was written in 1960 by Harry Gordon. Harry Gordon passed away a few years ago. He was working for News Limited, I think. But he was a journalist, and he came across Reginald Saunders, and he wrote this book called The Embarrassing Australian, the story of an Aboriginal warrior. Why is he an embarrassing Australian? Because nobody would look at him. You know, on the buses, on the trains. In the army, everybody looked at him because it didn't matter what the colour of your skin was. You needed somebody to look after your back. It didn't matter what it was. And this man became a captain eventually, and he looked after his co-ANZACs, you know, and they all supported each other as brothers.
Just for those who maybe don't know their Australian history and our listeners outside of Australia, I don't think it was until 1967 that Indigenous Australians actually got the right to vote.
That's correct.
And in the Australian Constitution, we were actually classified as fauna.
Correct.
In this country.
Correct.
In their own country.
Yeah.
That was 1967.
That's right.
That's not long ago.
That's 26 years after the escape and the evading of Captain Reginald Saunders on the island of Crete.
And here's Reginald Saunders.
Yeah, so he's fought.
Enlisting to fight.
His parents, his family has fought in the First World War. His brother gets killed in the Second World War in New Guinea, Harold Saunders. And he goes on to Korea. And that's the only place he really found that he was a worthy Australian. He just got on with it. But beyond that, though he was also president of the St Mary's RSL Club in the early 1960s, which was really an advance because of the respect and the honour of the man. And this is why, in this age where Australia's still trying to find itself with its first people, it's trying to find its history. It has found this amazing individual. And that's why the gallery the courtyard, and now, as you say, at the Australian War Memorial, and now you're saying a station.
Yeah,
in Sydney.
Street. So I guess when that opens up, we're all going to end up at that station one day.
I think we'll have to.
I think all Greeks, all Australians of Greek heritage should turn up at the station.
Absolutely.
On that day. Everybody listening, if that is the case, please turn up.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Well,
And-
I think we have to do a toast.
Yeah.
Sikudia to Reginald Saunders.
To Reginald
Absolutely.
Saunders.
To Reginald Saunders. Yamas.
And he says, of all the Cretan peasants, the most impressive I met was a woman called Vasiliki Zaharaki. Even
I love
puts
the
the
Cretan.
CHs. The CHs and CHs in here. It's not
Yeah.
Vasiliki, it's Vasiliki.
How good is that?
Saunders, she was about 35 with classical features and magnificent flashing eyes. She walked straight as a gun barrel and had courage to match. Her husband was a little man, a rank coward, and her brother Castelli was a member of the Greek Evzones, the blokes with the little frilly skirts. This is what he describes to this woman, and the Saunders family. The daughters went back with their children, and they met Areti, the daughter of Vasiliki, who was also involved. The kids were involved in harbouring and supporting Reginald Saunders. And they went back, and through that connection and through that story, it's an amazing thing when you see the connections when the daughters of Reginald Saunders meet Areti and her brother. It's a very emotional scene, you know. So you know, you've got themes there. You've got Indigenous Anzac, racism, support in the military, escapers and invaders. There's a great story there.
Well, we're just glad that he's getting the recognition that he deserves now. And this is one story out of all the ones that we're talking about now that is getting some recognition now. And we're just so happy that that's the case.
Just on that point, when we're talking about the support that people were given, the people were given there. Here's a letter somebody gave to me that their father had written back to somebody from Tasmania back to Greece. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's difficult to begin this letter as I feel so ashamed I have not answered your letters and the card which I received from you early in the year. However, when you know all, you will probably forgive me and still be my friend, as I shall never forget the days in your village and your assistance to us. I mean, just the connections that people maintained after with the Greek and the Cretan people.
It really is a recurring theme, isn't it?
Very much so. The themes, those recurring themes of friendship, they run through all of it.
And I mean, Cretans at the best of time. Let's be honest. There's two sides to Cretans. There's the one side where people think they're mad in Greece, but then there's the other side. I don't know, Nick, are they?
Well, I'll give you what Sir Anthony Beaver says.
Okay.
The Cretan character, warlike, proud, compulsive, generous to a friend or a stranger in need, ferociously unforgiving to an enemy or a traitor, frugal day by day, but generous in company and celebration, was of course strongly influenced by the landscape of dramatic contrast in which the islanders lived, rich coastal strips on the north coast, endless olive groves on the foothills, fertile valleys and all the odd little plains hidden in the highlands, which were overshadowed by the island's main spine of the White Mountains, the Kedros, Mount Ida, Psiloriti, and finally the Lassithi or the Dichti Mountains, all carved and divided by over 100 steep gorges.
Wow.
These are people on a terrain, and this is not unique to Crete. This is unique to all of Greece. These people on the terrain of Greece, on the mountains, on the valleys, on the gorges, they are fit people. Mm. They are farmers. They are shepherds. They are wine growers, olive growers. They are doing exercise, and they are in tune, and they are fit.
Yeah.
So when the Germans come along, they're not going to say no. They're going to say no, and they're going to say, you know what, you're not coming here, and I'm going to take you on. Yeah. And Greece, like we said before, lost 800,000 people. Villages in Crete got burned, decimated, executions, firing squads. But the people continuously resisted. Mm. And they have, and they will do it again. They will rise again, if anything happens.
Yeah. Nick, is it true? I read a story where the paratroopers or were floating, I guess, into Crete, and you had grandmas with pitchforks attacking these German soldiers, not taking a backward step.
It's all true. So Metaxa, for his famous "Then It Shall Be War," was also a dictator. Make no bones, this guy was educated in the military schools of Germany.
And was a divisive figure.
He was a fascist dictator who disarmed the population, disarmed not only the Greek mainland but also the island of Crete, so he can control the people. Now, that's why the Cretans came out with pitchforks and spikes, with axes and shovels and whatever they could get their hands on, and clubs, because their weapons were taken away from them by the dictatorship of Metaxas.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. One of the stories that comes up that sort of sums up the two sides to the Cretan sensibility, let's say. You know, there's the madness, but then there's this philotimo as well.
Generosity.
This unbelievable generosity. Was the story of General Cretan being kidnapped.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that they were kidnapping this Nazi general, there was also a lot of, they connected during the
They
course
did, because before General Cretan came to Crete, there was a ferocious general before him, Frederick Muller. And they'd already hatched a plan. So Patrick Leigh Fermor, a British travel writer before the war, travelled all over, had command of Greek, German, English, French, a multitude of languages, a very intelligent man. And he was a spy, basically, for the UK. And he rounded up troops, guerrilla fighters in Crete. And they had a plan to abduct Muller, the butcher of Crete. What happened is the plan was in train, everything was going well. And then they replaced him with General Cretan, who wasn't a butcher, because he didn't have time to Crete to show his true character. I don't know what he would have done. But so eventually, with Cretan Partizani, Cretan guerrillas, Giorgos Tirakis, Emmanuel Paterakis, Antonios Grigorios Papaleonidas, Michalis Akoumyanakis, Grigorios Chnarakis, Efthrathios Saviolakis, Dimitrios Tzatzadakis, Nikolaos Komis, Antonios Zoidakis, and the famous George Psychoundakis, the Cretan runner. Now, these people are not as well known as Patrick Leigh Fermor, because in the Anglosphere, we want our heroes. But the Greeks have a population of 10 million people, and they have their heroes too, but it's not in the Anglosphere. It's in the Greek Hellenic sphere. So some of these people are well known in Greece, and they've left their mark. The Cretan runner, Psychoundakis, ultra-marathons, carrying messengers back and forth between the group and the villages ahead. And he was the only one that wrote the account of a partisan account it was called the Cretan runner after the Second World War. Now, they did capture him. They captured General Cretan, the only commander in the Second War captured by civilians or guerrillas with the help of Patrick Leigh Fermor, obviously. Right?
But leave it to the Cretans to do something like that.
They did, because they're crazy, because they're fearless. Now, some Cretans aren't crazy and fearless, and they knew there'd be repercussions, but they did it. And yes, there were repercussions. If you look at Anoia and villages like that, there was a lot of repercussions, a lot of executions. As a matter of fact, even Patrick Leigh Fermor, whilst he loved Crete, he ended up living in Laconia, in the money district, the Peloponnese, because there was, I wouldn't say a vendetta, but there was a certain amount of the population said, this is crazy, and you led this and all the reprisals that happened on us. But a lot of Cretans supported it, and they did it. And they basically dressed up in a German uniform. They stopped the general's car on his way out of the Villa Ariadne. Villa Ariadne was built by Sir Arthur Evans, the famous archaeologist of Knossos. Right. That was his house, and that was taken over as a German headquarters. Okay. They studied him, and he was captured, and there was a 3-week trek across the island. 100,000 Italians and Germans occupying Crete, and they couldn't find him. Eventually, they got him off, and he was taken to Germany. After the Second World War...
Sorry, Nick, what happened? So they took him off the island?
They took him off the island.
And where did they take him?
To Egypt.
To Egypt?
Yeah, that's where the headquarters was of the Allied forces, and that's where they took him.
So he was a prisoner of war?
He was a prisoner of war.
Until the end of the war, and they released him?
That's right, yeah.
And I believe there's a book about that too.
That's right, and the book is Ill Met by Moonlight, and there was a film made by it by the British, Dirk Bogarde in the 1950s, with the music by Mikis Theodorakis.
Great film.
Legend.
Absolutely.
Yeah, black and white film.
Another famous Cretan.
Another famous Cretan. So I hope you do a podcast on Mikis Theodorakis in the future.
We will.
We will be. You were just saying that after the war, that something happened after the war.
So after the war, what happened, Patrick Leigh Fermor got together General Crepe and the Cretan guerrillas, and there was this, like a television, this is your lifestyle, and it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, so people are welcome to go and have a look at it. And you see the great charisma of Patrick Leigh Fermor, the mastery of the languages of Greek and English and German, and the meeting of the Cretans. They were so proud. The Cretans were so proud to capture the commander of Crete. And
where was this recorded at?
It was in the I think it was one of the television studios in Athens, in Ert.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's in Ert, and it's on YouTube, and you can have a look at it in colour. And it's an amazing encounter.
They captured him, you know, it's like a game. We won, and then this is your life. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, and he came back. Look, he appears in the movie and also in the This Is Your Life encounter as a man of honour, Crepe. He obviously, I can't say what he would have done if he was in Crete as a commander for months on with the guerrillas continuously occupying, pestering the Nazis and the Italians there. I don't know what he would have done. But the story is that in the end, when you look at him on that stew, he doesn't appear like that butcher that Mullah did.
There seemed to be a great level of respect between all of them, and they were all. I mean, I've seen it. There's a lot of backslapping going on. There's a lot of laughing happening.
Look, if you look at the guerrilla fighters, they're just normal people. But for them, this was a big moment. This was a historic moment that they participated in, and they went on TV and they were so proud. Now, George Psychoundakis, he wrote the Cretan Runner. Patrick Leigh Fermor translated it, and it's the only account of the resistance, of civilian guerrilla resistance in the Second World War. Yeah, so that's something to look out for if people go to Crete, and I encourage all listeners to go to not only to Crete, throughout Greece. There's a great Australian footprint, an ANZAC footprint, a New Zealand footprint, an English footprint, all over Greece. And you will find the stories of your country, of your people there, from Lemnos to Salonika to Macedonia, all the way down to Tempe, to Bralos Pass, where the stand was like the Thermopylae stand, all the way down through the Corinth and the Peloponnese and into Crete, and into some of the islands. There are cemeteries on roads, on Crete, in Chania, in Athens. Phaleron has got ANZACs buried there, and then the ones that aren't found are on these massive marble monuments. Their names are there. They never found. Over half of the ANZACs in Greece in the Second World War were never found. Their remains were never found.
Wow.
And all we have is just their names, and they're memorialised there.
There's a huge connection with Greeks and the Australians, like you said. But from what you mentioned earlier, I think it was off air, that the Greeks gave presents to the Australians. I think the soil.
So
tell us that story.
Okay, so after the Second World War, they've created a monument in Athens, in the Field of Mars. Στα ελληνικά, in Greek, το παιδιών του Άρη, του Αρίων, κάτι τέτοιο. And there's a monument there of Athena on top of a massive spire, and there's the Australian, English, and New Zealand flags, and that's commemorating, and Menzies went there for that, right? But what the Greeks did is they had this ancient 2,500 years old urn, and after the war, they got soil from an Australian grave in Phaleron in Athens, and they put the soil inside the 2,500-year-old urn pot, what do you want to call it, right?
Was it Corinthian urn?
Corinthian urn, 500 BC. And they gifted it to Australia. It is the only time that Greece has ever gifted its soil to a foreign nation. But out of the respect, out of the stories, out of the defence of Greece that came, and the connections, is this country gave this museum piece. And this museum piece, with the earth from an Australian grave was in the Australian War Memorial in the basement. And Dr. Panayotis Diamandis brought it to my attention. This was about 2015, around the centenary of ANZACs. And I knew that at the ANZAC Memorial in Hyde Park, they were going to expand that memorial to somewhere where the original vision was, with water and soil, and there was something that obviously, because it was done during the Depression in the 1930s, it was cut to a certain point. And in 2018, they opened up the new memorial extension. And I encourage all the listeners in Sydney and from all over Australia and the world, when you come to Sydney, go and visit this memorial. And you will see a soils exhibition there of places where the Australians have fought. And they have selected 4 soils from Greece. They've selected the soil from Vivi when the battle started, near the northern Macedonia region and near the border. They selected a soil from Tempe. They selected a soil from Rethymnon in Crete. And they selected a soil from Cape Spada. Now, Cape Spada is a cape in Crete. If you look at the map of Crete, it's got like 2 little peninsulas or horns going out into the Aegean. Mm-hmm. And one of them is Spada. Now, they picked the soil there because off that was the famous battle of HMAS Sydney, where it sunk the Bartholomew Colleoni before it was sunk off the coast of Western Australia later on. And they picked that, and those 4 soils, you can see them at the Anzac Memorial. I saw this vision that they had, and I thought, that's awesome, that is fantastic. But I also knew about this museum piece with the soil of an Australian soldier in Canberra in the basement. And I wrote to Dr. Brendan Nelson at the time, the director of the Australian War Memorial, and the trustees, and the trustees wrote to them, to Dr. Brendan Nelson, saying, we'd love to have this as part of our exhibition. And I encourage everybody to go and see the soils from Greece, but also see this beautiful museum piece, 2,500-year-old Corinthian urn, which inside it has the soil of an Australian.
And that's not the only Greek connection at that memorial either, is there? There's a Spartan shield, I understand, there as well.
So at the centre of the Anzac Memorial in Hyde Park, the founders, the designers, have used the ancient Greek classical theme of the Spartan shield. And you will see there an unknown Anzac, naked, semi-naked, on a Spartan shield, supported by 3 women, the mother, the wife, and the sister. In Australia's memorials, wherever you go in Australia, you will see classical Greek culture and commemoration. You will see it at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, which has Doric columns like the Parthenon. It has a massive spire and it says Greece, Crete on it. On the top of it is a copy of the Lysikrates monument from Athens at the top of the Shrine of Remembrance. So the founders of commemoration in Australia, Australians, were trained in classical Greek. They were exposed to Hellenic culture, and they've used that in those memorials. And go to Hyde Park from the Anzac Memorial, go to the Archibald Fountain, dedicated to Australians in France by Archibald. And what does it use? It uses the Minotaur, Theseus, the underworld, the darkness of war. It has Apollo, the god of light, and the sun. It has Artemis. It has many themes there.
Oh. Michael, what are your thoughts on, as an archaeologist, when you see these things, Australia using symbolism like that, but in particular, that gift of earth in that museum piece? I mean, it's obviously important for us as Greeks, but what are your thoughts about it?
I think it indicates the strong connection between Greece and Crete. Even in the cemeteries, though, you'll see those connections. Mm-hmm. In general cemeteries, you'll see that the Greek symbolism is often used in the cemeteries themselves. Yeah. From an archaeological point of view, I've never really thought about it. You must forgive me. I've never made that. I can see the connection, but I've never really considered it.
I can't think of any other other piece, in history that would be sort of taken and reappropriated in such a way?
What was the word you used?
Reappropriated.
I'll give you another one.
Really? Okay.
So the Australian War Memorial is in the shape of a cross with a Byzantine church theme. So the Australian War Memorial in Canberra has a cross with a dome of the Byzantine church.
Okay.
Wow. A lot of connections there. None of us are none the
Did you know
wiser.
that, Nick?
Not at all. But which reminds you, there's another great story you mentioned again off air. You tell us a lot of good stuff off air, so I think it's good. Actually,
we
get
talk
to
too
that-
much.
We do. Before we get to that, hang on. We need another drink.
Absolutely.
And
now this,
what are we
this
drinking?
particular
this
drink
time.
What's this
is in
one?
a special bottle.
Did you fill that up?
I did fill it up.
So
Nick's
this-
going to tell us
It
what it
just
is.
drops
special-
out of the sky, Michael.
This special bottle.
I didn't know if I drank the last one.
I'm very stealth.
Okay, so this special bottle was given to me by a great Australian, Alf Carpenter. He's alive today. He's 105, and he fought all the way from northern Greece into Crete.
You're kidding. Alf Carpenter,
Yeah,
105.
And 105, and he's in Newcastle.
G'day, Alf.
To Alf.
To Alf.
To
Alf, this one's for
Alf
you, mate.
Carpenter.
Alf Carpenter.
Yamas.
To Alf.
Yamas.
Yamas.
Cheers to you, Alf.
Cheers, Alf.
Cheers, Alf.
And Alf gave... I met Alf in 2009. Take it easy on this one, boys.
Whoa.
Take it easy, all right?
Whoa.
Okay, so
We're
I
going to
met
start
Alf.
talking Cretan in a minute.
I met Alf
Me
in
too.
2009. We went and I presented him with a plaque from the Australian and New Zealand Cretan Federation, and he said, "You know what? I went into his house in Charlestown, in Newcastle, and he had this wall where people would normally have a plasma TV, or something like that. This man had his medals, had citations from Greece, from Australia, had certificates, Greek medals, war medals. It was like a shrine to Australians in Greece. He got Order of Australia, and he goes, you know what? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. He says, I really appreciate you guys coming over. He says, see that bottle over there above the fireplace? It was given to me in 1991 on the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Crete. I went back to Crete. And I've had it here for 18 years now. I think now's a good time to open it. And he opened that bottle, the green bottle there. You can see the centenary, the 50 years on
So
that.
this is the bottle.
It's the bottle, only the bottle. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, Alf, back then he was in his 90s, we finished the bottle. It was a small bottle. It's only a small bottle. It's like a gazosa bottle for the listeners. Gazosa bottles of the 1980s and 90s,
Yeah.
you can recall those.
We'll take a photo and post it on
Yeah,
Instagram.
take a photo and post it on. I couldn't help myself. I took the bottle, and I've kept the bottle now since 2009. But what I put into it is a very special drink, and that's what you guys are drinking now. This is
vicious.
This is vicious. I want you to sip it very slowly.
Why didn't you tell me
It's a
earlier?
good
All right? Do not.
That should have come with a warning, Nick.
This is a
I think it does. It says Crete on it.
This is a chikudia made in southeastern Chania, in the region of southeastern Chania. It is a chikudia found nowhere else in Greece or in Crete. It's made from the juiciest, blackest, most ripened mulberries of the region.
Okay.
They call it in Cretan Mournarorachi
Right, yeah, the Cretans come out.
or
Here we go. That's a good segue.
Mournidia.
Okay.
Now, this is only made in those villages of Temenia, Yairini, and it is potent. It's running at 55 to 60% alcohol.
Holy shit.
You want to sip this because the reason why is if you sip it very slowly, it'll evaporate in your mouth before it touches your throat. And it has great nuances and flavours that are found in no other drink. This reminds me of the story of Dick Plant. Dick Plant was an Australian with Lou Lind, and he's on the run. He's injured. He's got blood poisoning. He's running through the village of Moni, which is near these villages here in Selinos, in my part
Can
of
you just
Crete.
repeat that?
Moni, M-O-N-I.
Moni. Okay.
Okay, Moni,
Let's just
Moni, as in monastery. Okay,
let's just
Okay.
get that sorted.
and the Cretans have, Lou Lind's with him. Lou Lind, another famous Australian, has passed away, and he's carrying him. He's holding him. The guy's sick as, and he gets to a house in Moni, in these villages where this Mournarorachi is made,
This guy's laughing.
Not no, it's the alcohol.
It's the... Sorry, Nick.
Okay, that's okay.
You fucking killed us.
and then
We're only on the third bottle.
we got to have a bit of a laugh.
We
as well,
do.
you
We
know?
have to.
And he goes, and the Cretans get him, the Zorbazakis family, and they do cupping on the sick plant.
Okay.
They cup him, you know, with venduzas.
Yeah, I had it
We
a
spoke-
week ago.
Yeah, bravo.
And we spoke about it in our
yeah.
last podcast.
And they saved this guy's life. They saved Dick Plant's life.
With venduzas.
With venduzas and cupping and cutting and oozed the poison out of his blood, it saved his life. He gets back to Australia and eventually gets back to Crete and he meets the old warriors there. And one of them, Andonis Daskalaki, says, with a translator obviously, I have a daughter in Sydney, in Paddington. He gets back to Australia and he heads straight for Paddington. And Dick Plant goes and sees his Cretan daughter in Australia, Nick Andriotakis.
Wow.
And I met Dick Plant when I was 20.
Mm-hmm.
I met an Australian that spoke Greek. I never met an Australian before that spoke Greek with a Cretan accent.
Kidding.
And this guy, he would go to the shooting range in Malabar from Bayview, which is up at Palm Beach.
Yep.
On the way, he'd stop at Paddington.
I could see that
So he
rifle range from my bedroom growing up.
Yeah, and he would stop at Paddington to hang around the Cretans. And I saw him there.
Wow. What a story.
Unbelievable.
Wow. Nick, can you give us... So you talked about the Cretan dialect. Can you give us an example of how the word is spoken back then? Or give us an example of the Cretan dialect.
Okay.
I love this.
So in Athenian, you would say, Kalimera σας. Τι κάνετε? Είστε καλά? Χαίρετε. In Cretan dialect, be, Ita κάνεις μωρέ κοπέλι. Kalimera.
I love it. I love it. Nick, can you talk Cretan from here on in? Is
Άμα
that okay?
θέλεις.
Yeah.
Όσα θες και όταν μπορούμε, ό,τι θα κάνουμε και θα τα λέμε.
When Nick gets into the Cretan, it's like he's transformed. The Nick we know goes away.
You know what? He grows 10 foot tall. Chest comes out.
Look, there's a little story here. I go to Greece with my kids, my wife, and we go to the archaeological sites and we go to the beaches, the umbrellas, and we go everywhere. I say, don't say a thing. I'm going to speak in Cretan dialect here.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
We're getting
we
rolled.
know we're getting rolled here. Because they can see your dress, they can see your way you're dressed and everything. But when you go to a beachside and you go, «Είτε κάνεις μωρέ κοπέλι, αυτές οι ομπρέλες, ή τα κάνουνε. Πόσα θες?» How much do you want for an umbrella? You know? And the guy, «Απ' την Κρήτη είσαι?» Του λέω, «Ναι, κι εγώ απ' την Κρήτη είμαι». And then it starts a conversation.
Yeah.
It's not meant to roll them. It's meant to connect. That's what it's for. Yeah. And what you do is you do connect, because within 5 seconds I'll say I'm from Australia.
Yeah.
But what I want to do is to try and just connect with them.
Yeah.
And to say, well, I'm a Cretan, I'm a Greek, but then I tell him I'm from Australia. I won't hide that from him.
Yeah, look, we do the same when we go to Greece as well. We just say, look, I'm a Greek from Australia, and they love it.
Yeah.
I said, oh my God, wow, you're a Greek from Australia. And then you got to tell them a story and so forth. And they always finish off, the cosmos you one of us still. Always.
So sip this one very slowly.
Oh, man.
I'm getting a smokiness from it as well.
You're getting all kinds of things. You get. Look, remember, it's a black fruit. There's other esters, other nuances, flavors. This one deserves respect. Slow sip. Siga, siga.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I've got a bit of a story on the Cretan spirit.
Oh, please.
Oh, here we go.
Please.
Stories are getting better now. Keep
I
on
happen
going.
to be married to a German.
Okay.
My wife is German. And we were, my friend Elpida and her husband were taking us around to meet some people to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, go and talk to this fellow. He was an eyewitness to the bombing of the craft. He saw it get sunk. So we're sitting there and we're having a drink. And my friend Elpida, her husband, Mike, thought it'd make a really good joke to tell him. So he said, look, Germans captured another Australian. He didn't think my wife was German. He thought she was Australian. That was the end of the conversation. We had to leave.
Really?
He wouldn't talk to us anymore. The next day he saw me, he came over and he apologized. And he said, well, 2 of my brothers were killed by the Germans. It's very difficult for me, but I do understand.
Yeah.
And another thing on the Cretan spirit is that the wrecks that I worked on, I found in the records that they carried, one of the wrecks carried 4 Vickers machine guns, brand new Vickers machine guns that they picked up from Suda Island on their way out of Suda Bay, on the way around Western Crete. Both of the wrecks, I've spent hundreds of hours diving on them. There's no Vickers machine guns to be found on these wrecks. And I'd always wondered what had happened to them. And I knew the locals knocked off a lot of stuff. And we were in a village, and El Peter was with me, and we were talking to people, and I said, well, go and ask about the machine guns. Because the Cretan people, because I don't speak Greek, they don't trust me, but they trust El Peter. So she asked, does anybody know what happened to the machine guns? And one guy just started to nod. And I said, you got to ask him. And he said he knows somebody that has one in the basement, in his cellar.
Okay.
A working Vickers machine gun.
A working one.
Well, I'm sure it's still working. And then I said, look,
Cretans don't muck around with that stuff, mate.
Well, you've got to ask him. And I said, well, why would you want a machine gun? And he said, you never know when the Germans are going to come back.
I thought you were going to say for a Cretan wedding.
That's even better.
Up in the mountains, I went to one of those. It's a noisy affair, there's no doubt about that.
See, that at least is believable.
Yeah, classic. Nick, one story that you mentioned, I think a couple of weeks ago, about a suburb in Margaret River. I think it was called Pendelly? Brevely.
Yes.
So what we have here is you got Jeff Edwards, an ANZAC, Western Australia, Perth. He's in Rathmno. He's evading capture. He gets to the monastery of Brevely in the centre of Rathmno, south coast, roughly, and they save his life. The monks, under the guise of the monastery, have a radio transmitter, have connections and talking with submarines, and they get him off Crete.
Wow.
He comes back to Perth in the Second World War, after the Second World War, and he's so thankful and grateful. He names his house in Perth Brevely. He leaves Brevely, his house, he goes to the Margaret River, then it was just bush, and creates a caravan park, post-World War II, caravan park. And he calls it Brevely Park. He's sending money back, he's sending food back to Crete in the post-war period. Eventually, over time, the park becomes popular and whatever. The Margaret River starts to gain traction as a wine region, surf region, and so forth. We get into 1979, late 70s, and what he does, he applies for a subdivision, and he creates in his subdivision the town of Brevely.
Sorry, Mike. Sorry to interrupt. Michael's just having a sip here, mate. This stuff is potent.
I told you guys.
Michael, you need to sip it, mate.
Yeah, you have to sip it. You've got to give it respect.
You said you could taste smokiness. Did you mean your eyes were misting over, perhaps?
I'm numb at the moment. I don't taste anything.
So we've got a 3-bottle limit, it
seems. Well, I think we passed the 3-bottle. We've got one to go.
Yeah.
And so...
Sorry, keep going.
So what happens? He picks this parcel of land and he creates the subdivision. And he calls one of the streets Papadakis Street. He sells the blocks off. People go and build houses. All of a sudden, you've got a village called Brevely at the mouth of the Margaret River in Western Australia. In 1979, he leaves a few parcels of land left over. And what does he do? He uses the money from the subdivision and the land holding, selling, and he builds a Greek Orthodox church called St. John the Theologian, Aios Ioannis o Theologos, the same name of the monastery in southern Crete. And he gives it to the Greek Archdiocese of Australia. And when you go to this church, I encourage all listeners, when they go to Margaret River to enjoy the beautiful wines,
first and foremost,
go there and see this church and see the pews, the chairs, the seats, and all the little emblems of the different divisions in Greece. Australian ANZACs at fought on the back. Then I want you also to go to Google Images, Google Maps. Have a look at where the Kourtaliotiko Potami runs out at Brevely Beach in Crete, and have a look at the Margaret River running out into the Indian Ocean in Prevelly in Australia. And you'll be stunned by the similarity. That's all I can say.
Wow.
This is an amazing connection. And the Margaret River Surf Contest is held in Prevelly, Western Australia. And that place, that village, that town derives its name from Prevelly Monastery in Crete, thanks to Jeff Edwards, an amazing Australian.
And the respect he had.
Yeah.
Wow, I think we need to... I'm hammered, but I think we need to have another
There's
shot.
one more. So
I'm going for it. I've got to... I actually drank...
Well, you got to have that now. Nick Andriotakis is saying we've got to crack the other bottle.
we have a new bottle here, the last bottle.
Last bottle for the last stories.
Yeah, this is made in Sydney. I'm not going to disclose where it's made.
This
Okay.
one.
It's made out of respect by my brother-in-law to our father-in-law, late father-in-law Nikolaos Bertakis from the village of Marothokefala in Crete.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful Hunter Valley Verdelho Chikulia.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, you need to shoot that one now, Nick.
This is 55%.
It is, but you're at home.
Yeah.
You don't have to drive.
While this is being poured, just talking about the respect that people gained while they were in Greece and Crete, I read you a couple of paragraphs earlier from that letter. When the writer of that letter came back to Australia after Greece and Crete, well, after he got out of prisoner of war camp, he married, but he married in a Greek Orthodox church.
Unbelievable.
There you go.
So here, if you with this Verdelho Chikulia, you can smell some of the wine, some of the grape variety of the.
What's the alcohol content of this, Nick?
No, this is a normal 40%.
40, down from 55. I just had another shot, by the way.
So no smokiness.
Oh no, this is different. This has got some beautiful sweet characteristics, slight sweet.
Okay.
Is this how the Cirque du Soleil characters light flames with the torch, drinking this
I don't
stuff?
think so.
Well, I have a great
This is
picture
more
that
floral.
I'll show you guys a great picture after this podcast of Flambe Murnaroraki that's rising at least to 4 to 5 feet. Something like almost 1.6 metres in the air.
Well, that doesn't surprise me after having it.
Absolutely. And they're flambéed mushrooms, and they used Murnaroraki Noon by a great friend of mine. I won't mention names because all these things are for another time.
Yep.
And the flambe went 1.6 metres in the air.
With the amount that Nick's had tonight, if you light a match, how much will you reckon he'll burn?
I think I'm already lit. Hey, I'm already burning.
Stay away from
How low's
flames.
the ceiling?
I don't know far to travel, boys.
Yeah.
15 metres.
That's it.
So on the last toast, hero to the ANZACs, hero to the Greek people. Here is to our common Greek-Australian story. Lemnos, Macedonia, Greece, Crete, and the 2,500 Australians of Greek heritage that served Australia. Eviva.
Here.
Here.
Yamas.
Come out.
Cheers to them. Oh dear.
Well,
We've got to sit closer together for these podcasts.
Yeah, we do. The amount of toasting we're doing.
We don't toast this much at weddings.
Yeah, isn't it? Don't we hear this?
Yeah. Nick, you're a bad influence, mate.
He's
But the
Greek.
best influence.
I love Nick. Nick's got to come on another podcast.
Hey, without mentioning any names, just before we finish, this is when we're talking about the dedication of friends.
Mm.
Two mates from Dubbo,
Mm-hmm.
ANZACs, enlisted together on the same day. I think their service numbers only 4 or 5 apart. Enlisted together. They fought together in Greece and Crete. They were captured in Crete. Went into prisoner of war camp together. They escaped together. They drowned together trying to swim across a swollen river in northern Germany, and are memorialised in Athens together.
Unbelievable.
And, I mean, that sort of, when we talk about the spirit of Anzac, I think that really is a very poignant sort of story.
Where were they kept? Prisoner of war camp.
I think it was Stalag 13C
Right.
up in northern Germany.
I'm not trying to be funny. What was Hogan's Heroes?
That's
13, but it's got a C on the end.
Yeah.
That was my first thought.
Yeah,
And I
I've
didn't
heard
want to
of that
mention it
before.
for the same reason.
So Stalag 13.
Some people will say to me, "Oh yeah, my father was in Stalag 13,"
You've been watching
but they
Hogan's
don't. They
Heroes.
forget the little C on the
Yeah.
end. Stalag 13C.
So,
Stalag 13C.
so as we go forward, what does it mean to be an Australian of Greek heritage in 5, 10, now, 50 years' time? These stories we've shared with people tonight are stories that can give some guidance. And the Anzac story in Greece will give some guidance. There's going to be mixed marriages. There's going to be an Australian people in the future. How do you connect to all that? How does a future Australian of Greek heritage or any heritage connect with their history?
Yeah.
And I think some of these stories we shared tonight and some of the stories in Greece in the First and Second World War, we haven't touched on Lemnos, that's for another day. And I hope you have the podcast on Lemnos and the First World War.
Mm.
And I think there's some great messages there's some great stories, and I hope that we can take those into the future with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is part of why we do this podcast, isn't it? We're trying to bring attention to a lot of these
Hidden or forgotten stories.
hidden stories. We're just glad that we have gentlemen like yourselves who know the stories well and can educate us about them, and in turn be able to pass them on to all, to the listeners.
But Tom, you started to talk about your great-grandfathers. You've got the stories. You can pass these on as well.
Yeah.
It's not just Nick and I. I mean, this is, I think, what Nick and I have both we work towards, is to get people to tell those stories and to pass them on.
Definitely.
Otherwise, they're going to be lost.
And that's the thing. It's a good point you made, Michael. And I've got lots of World War II stories with my ancestors.
Yeah.
But how do you get them out to people? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to, as Nick and I have talked about, raise that awareness.
And we thank you for that, and I thank the opportunity here. This is another way to do it.
Look, I just feel like looking at all the stories you've got written in front of you, I think we haven't even gone through half of them.
Oh, there's plenty more.
There might be a
For another
2.0
time.
episode.
Yeah, look,
there's a
For
few
another
more.
time.
We say-
thousand more.
Well, there's Anzac Day next year. There's Ohi
is.
Day later in the year as
There
well.
is.
There's plenty of opportunity, and look, these stories aren't going to dry up. There are so many stories out there that we haven't even scraped the surface. There are so many stories that haven't even come to light yet.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
From
That's
the
even
war.
us too. We've got some personal stories we haven't shared with you
Yep.
about
Exactly.
our families. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
we'll have to do another episode.
And
Well,
I'm sure the listeners.
I think that's the message here for all the listeners is, do you have a story in your family?
Absolutely.
Do you have a
Exactly.
story in somebody else's, a friend's family? Is there something there? Bring them out. Talk about it. The majority of ANZACs, they were prisoners of war when they came back from a defeated campaign in Greece and Crete. They didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
I encourage everybody to bring it as a living history.
Yes.
To talk about it, not only on Anzac Day, to talk about it through the year.
Yeah.
To go to Greece, to go to Crete, to go to wherever your ancestor was, New Guinea, Western France,
Yes,
Gallipoli,
yes,
wherever,
yes.
and
Yes.
go there and see and feel. And there are many people that are against war. I understand that. There are many people that don't like this commemoration, but they're a minority. The majority,
But it's important to say that it is a commemoration. This is
It
not
is.
a celebration.
no,
We are not.
That's exactly right.
We are not glorifying war.
no.
We are commemorating.
We're commemorating the sacrifice,
Correct.
the passion, and the love they have for this country. That's what we're doing.
The idea of a story told is a life lived. If the story is not told, that life is wasted in a way. It's forgotten, very soon forgotten. Even if it's just sitting around drinking raki with friends,
Yeah.
And
and
Sikulia.
suddenly, and people
everything
will
else
say,
Nick's brought in.
and people will say, "Wow, what a great story!" And
Yeah.
somebody's going to run with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll be a book. That'll be a movie. That could be that could be anything.
Absolutely.
It could be anything. When you see what these people did, the emotions, the feelings these people had, and what they put into it.
Yeah. Look, even just talking about Battle of Crete, Hill 731, as we mentioned, you could write movies on that, books on that.
Exactly.
Actually, there are
Absolutely.
books on this,
Yeah.
but we could do Hollywood, movies on this as well.
And again, that comes back to what we were saying earlier. Hollywood's done a great job of glorifying, well, not glorifying, has done a great job of
telling the story,
telling certain stories. Everyone knows,
Everybody
everyone knows the story of Pearl
Hollywood
Harbor
way, yeah.
and Midway and all of these things because they've made movies about it. It's in the popular culture. It's incumbent on us to be able to do the same.
So it
for our
means
stories.
we have to put romance into all of these stories, otherwise nobody's going to remember them, because that's what Hollywood does, don't they?
That's true. That's very true.
So if there's any movie producer out there, I'm sure I can assist them.
We've got lots of good stories.
We do, absolutely.
We have some real...
We have
famous
romance. We do have romance. We have Slim
sex.
Wrigley.
We got the lot.
We have Slim Wrigley.
Say that story. You told me that the other day too.
Yeah, I'm just going off memory here. So he was, Slim was in northern Greece, and he was with the family there. The details escape me here. But what I do know is that they supported him, and Slim was beside himself. At night he had great guilt. He knew that if the Germans were anywhere near him, this family would be executed straight away. So in the middle of the night he escaped silently, because he didn't want the guilt and the pressure of this family that would eventually be destroyed. But the Greeks heard him leaving the house, and then when they grabbed him, they went and grabbed him and brought him back. After the Second World War, he wrote letters, and he ended up marrying the daughter of the house. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I'm just saying there are many stories out there. That's only a very small one. But for somebody, it's massive.
Oh, yeah.
Did you end up meeting this guy, Nick?
No.
And did they live in Sydney? Where did they live?
That's a story that Dr. Maria Hill, another great Greek Australian, that brought to light in her book Diggers and Greeks. It's still out there. I'm sure you can buy it on the internet. So please buy it if you want to read about that story.
Hey, Michael, you mentioned earlier you had a book. What was the title of the book?
That's called The Forgotten Flotilla. Now, that's just about the landing craft, the wreck that we came across in Crete.
Perfect.
And the work that it did, and the connection to the ANZACs.
Fantastic. And do you want to give a plug to your new book, or is it too early?
The new book, it's probably too early because, unless there's any publishers out there.
Yeah. There might be. We're in 59 countries now.
Look, the new book, I've entitled it Dust and Shadows.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the book I've designed it to carry the nominal role, the complete nominal role, but setting it within a scaffold of untold stories, diary entries, and that sort of thing too. To tell people, the story of Greece and Crete and the battles have been told, the intricacies of the battles have been told so many times before, and by better writers than me and better historians. I believe that the untold stories, the real feeling stories from the personal diaries, and these sort of things will allow people to perhaps start to realise what these people went through when they were in Greece and Crete, how they felt about the Greeks, how they felt about the Cretan people, but also how they felt about war. These diary entries that I've excerpted and put throughout the book, I hope will make people start to realise what these men, these women were young. 21, 22, even younger. As Nick said, it's completely different. The generation now is so completely different.
Yeah.
And hopefully people may start to realise the importance of their relatives that have gone before and what they actually did. This skipper that I talked about, the man navigated his way around the Mediterranean without compasses and without charts. He was 21 years old. When I asked him how he did it, I said, John, how did you get around the Mediterranean? He said, I had a schoolboy knowledge of astronomy, and I knew where the North Star was, so I got a broom handle and I tied it to the railing around the deck, and I got somebody to sit up there and keep it in line. So he's tied a broom handle. He's navigated his way around the Mediterranean with a broom handle. Now, how many 21-year-olds today would even know what a broom is? Think about it.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Great.
If you gave them a broom, they'd have no idea what to do with it. And here's John getting around the Mediterranean with it.
Yeah. The stories speak for themselves. And look, as Nick said earlier, if you do have a story and you're listening to this, email us at ouzotalk@outlook.com. Tell us your story and we will put you in touch with Michael and Nick. But just make sure that you're telling these stories and make sure that you're documenting them. Make sure that you keep it alive.
Yes.
And if you've got relatives that actually know these stories, make sure you're documenting it for them. They're not going to be around forever. It's incumbent on us to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure these stories stay alive and with us.
Well said, Tom. And we're going to have to do another episode on this. Like, even I'm not doing my own ancestors justice. Like I mentioned before, Papa Fortis, he was involved with the Sarandanya Paramithia, which is an amazing story. My grandmother got caught by the Germans. That's another story which we haven't even touched on. Costa Thanasiou from Petrovica, that was another story. So, look, we have to do another episode. And apologies to my ancestors for not really mentioning their stories, which I do know.
Next episode.
There will be, definitely Greeks in World War II episode 2.0. But look, Nick, I think it's been a fantastic episode. I think, do you want to just any final comments you want to mention before we close this out?
Thank you, Nick. Well, thank you, Tom. I think it's been a great symposium. That's what we're doing.
Yes.
So,
Definitely.
Ouzo Talk is a Greek symposium. That's what it is. And thank you very much. And thank you, Michael, for coming.
My
It's
absolute
been a great
pleasure.
honor. Thank you.
Thank you both, gentlemen.
Lovely to
It's
meet you
been
both and talk to
unbelievable.
everybody.
Nick, you can't really say too much more after that, can you? I mean, those stories, just unbelievable.
I know we've had or maybe a little bit too much to drink tonight, but look, emotional stories, they're very touching, and more importantly, they need to be shared, they need to be told. And the good thing is we're actually recording this podcast, and this will be here for life now. So like Tom said earlier, if you've got any stories that you want to share with us, please reach out to us, because we'll be doing another episode.
Yeah.
And Nick, you were fantastic, and Michael, awesome. Your stories were fantastic. And look, there's going to be definitely another episode to come out of this, because I just feel like we've only touched the surface.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's so many other battles that happened, that went on, we haven't even touched on.
There's no end to it.
We talked about individual stories, but we didn't even talk about the whole story of what happened. And there's probably a lot of veterans or ancestors to veterans listening to this. They say, you should have mentioned this, should have mentioned that.
Yeah.
There is. So apologies to those people out there, but there's only so much we can say. I think we've gone over time here, but
We're nearly 3 hours at this point.
wow. Okay, this is a record for Ouzo
One
Talk.
last thing.
Yeah.
If people want help with research or direction with
Yes.
research for Greece or Crete, please get in contact with Ouzo Talk, and the boys will put them.
We'll put
them
you
in contact with you.
I'm glad you could say that, because I missed it.
I'm blaming that on what Nick's brought in.
No, it's cool.
Listen,
That's
the only thing I brought tonight
There'll
was
be
a
a
Cretan
connection.
dialect.
There will be a connection, and I don't.
Michael, you sound very Cretan.
Yeah.
Oh, I spend a lot of time there.
It's called the talking.
Yes.
That's why Cretans talk the way
Yeah.
they do.
Yes.
Well,
I love it.
gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Nick, thank you for coming again.
Thank you, Tom. Thank
Michael,
you, Nick.
unbelievable
Absolute
stories.
pleasure.
Nick
Absolute
Athanasiou, thank you very much as well.
Thank you,
boys.
guys.
Thank you so much. It was an honour to have you guys here in our house, in our distillery.
In the distillery, that's it.
Yes, and you too, Tom. Great effort, mate. The way you started this podcast, brilliant. I was getting goosebumps hearing those stories again. It's great.
That's what I do,
Done a
mate.
great job.
As we said, email us at ouzotalk@outlook.com. Follow us on social media at Ouzo Talk on most social media platforms, and at Ouzo_talk on Instagram. We'll see you next time.
Ακολουθήστε μας στο Soundees, στο Spotify, στο Apple Podcasts και στο Google Podcasts.